Welcome back to MHS, Midnight Horror Stories. I know that many of you turn to these videos as a gentle way to unwind and ease into sleep. So before you drift off tonight, could you help me with a small favor? Just leave a quick interaction, a comment, a like, or let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Simple actions like these help YouTube appreciate the content and spread the show to more people. If there's a topic or story you'd love to see featured on the channel, don't hesitate to leave a comment. Thank you for spending your time here. Now, let's dive into tonight's horror stories. This happened when I was 16. It was a weekend in Ohio. My parents were out at a friend's wedding and said they'd be home late. They asked me to stay home and take care of my little brother. He was 6, clingy, and always glued to cartoons. Jake was planted in front of the TV in the living room, totally zoned out. I headed to the kitchen to grab some orange juice from the fridge. Our house sat at the very end of the street, with just a few other houses scattered nearby. Behind us was a small patch of woods, mostly tall oak trees. As I was pouring the juice, I glanced out the kitchen window. It was already dark out, and the yellow streetlights were casting this dull glow over the driveway. That's when I saw someone standing next to my neighbor's trash can, maybe like 30 feet away. He looked like he might have been homeless. He was staring straight at me, right through the kitchen window. I took a step back. Maybe he was just passing by. I waited a few seconds, then looked again. He was still there, still staring. Only now, he was closer. He was standing right at the edge of our yard. "Jake, come upstairs," I called out, trying to sound chill. "Why? The cartoon's not over yet. Just go upstairs, now." Jake must have caught the seriousness in my voice, because he shut off the TV and dragged himself upstairs without arguing. I flipped off the kitchen light and looked out the window again. The guy was gone. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Maybe he'd finally left. But just as I turned to leave the kitchen, I caught movement by the dining room window. He was still there, circling the house. My heart was slamming in my chest. I took off running, checking every door and window, hands shaking as I double-checked the locks. My palms were slick with sweat. Then I got to the living room, and there he was. Outside, right there, trying to mess with the window. I backed up until I hit the wall. I needed something. Anything. My brain was spinning. Kitchen knife? No. Too risky. What if he grabbed it from me? I yanked open a drawer and fumbled around. My hand landed on something cold. Heavy. Mom's meat hammer. I pulled it out, felt the solid weight in my hand. "Jake," I whispered, still downstairs. "What?" Relief washed over me. He was okay. I peeked out one last time, then crept upstairs to him. He saw the hammer in my hand and squinted. "What are you gonna do with that?" I didn't answer, just went around the house, turning off every light. The place went pitch black. Only a bit of streetlight spilled in through the windows. I took Jake to my parents' room and locked the door behind us. This room was all the way down the hall, the farthest one from the stairs. If anything happened, at least we'd have some time. "Why'd we turn off the lights?" Jake whined. "We're playing hide and seek," I told him. I pulled him into the closet. It was just big enough for the two of us to sit down inside. Jake huddled close next to me. Through the crack in the door, I had a partial view of the bedroom window. I listened. Other than the wind rustling through the oak trees, it was dead quiet. 10 minutes passed. Maybe the guy had left. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Jake was getting antsy. He wasn't built for sitting still this long. He kept whispering about wanting to go back down to watch cartoons. "Not yet. Sit still." "But I'm bored." I put a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Stay still. We'll go down in a bit." And then I heard something from downstairs, a soft scraping sound, like someone trying to jimmy open a window. My heart kicked into overdrive. I gripped the meat hammer tighter. Jake must have felt me tense up, because he went quiet too. The scraping stopped, Then came a sharp crack, glass breaking. Jake flinched, clutching my shirt. "What was that?" he whispered. I quickly covered his mouth with my hand, told him without words, "Don't make a sound." Then we heard it. Heavy footsteps, slow, measured. He was inside. I pulled Jake even closer, feeling him shaking against me. The footsteps moved across the living room. I heard furniture being dragged, drawers yanked open. He was going through everything. Jake leaned in and whispered in my ear, "I'm scared." "It's okay. I'm here," I whispered back, though my voice was shaking just as much as he was. Then I heard the fridge open, the clink of bottles inside. Footsteps moved closer, stopping at the bottom of the stairs. The whole house went quiet. The only sounds were me and Jake, breathing hard in the dark closet. Then the footsteps started up the stairs, one slow step at a time. The old wooden stairs creaked under his weight. He wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. I gripped the meat hammer tighter, heart pounding. He reached the top and paused. I could hear him breathing, a raspy, wet kind of wheeze. He was right outside the hallway, just a few steps from my parents' bedroom. Then he turned left, into my room. He was going through the house, room by room, systematic. Then he moved into the little upstairs lounge. Books hit the floor, chairs got knocked over. Then his steps stopped right outside our door. I quickly signaled Jake to stay quiet and held my breath. He froze in my arms. We heard the doorknob turn. Click. The lock held. He twisted it again, harder this time. The door rattled in its frame, wood creaking, but it didn't budge. Then came the pounding. Heavy, violent blows over and over, hammering the door. Jake started to cry. I pulled him in tight and slapped a hand over my own mouth to keep from making a sound. Then suddenly, it stopped. Silence. Total silence. We stayed still, just listening. Sweat was dripping down my back. The arm I had wrapped around Jake had gone completely numb, but I didn't dare move. The hammer in my hand felt heavier by the second. Jake had finally stopped crying. Then, off in the distance, I heard sirens. They were getting closer, louder. Suddenly, footsteps, rushed, bolting down the stairs. Then bam! The back door slammed shut, hard enough to shake the whole house. A police car screeched to a stop out front, red and blue lights flashing through the windows. I heard voices, officers shouting, radios crackling. Still, I didn't move. I was locked in place, clutching the hammer, holding Jake tight against me. Then came the call. "Police! Is anyone home?" Only then did I slowly open the closet door. Jake had fallen asleep in my arms. I carried him downstairs and opened the front door. 2 cops stood on the porch, with my neighbor Maya right behind them. Another pair of officers were already inside, shining flashlights over the shattered glass in the living room. "Are you hurt?" Maya asked, her face full of worry. I shook my head, still gripping the hammer. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't let it go. I hadn't even had time to call the cops. Thank God Maya saw someone creeping around our yard and dialed 911 right away. A few minutes later, Jake woke up, groggy, then totally lost it when he saw strangers in the house. I called my parents. My mom's voice was panicked on the phone. She said they'd be home right away. When they got back, she wrapped her arms around me and Jake. She was sobbing, her shirt soaked with tears. Dad just put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. An hour later, the cops finished taking our statements. They said they'd let us know as soon as they had more on the guy. Even after the cops left, Mom still couldn't calm down. She just kept hugging us and crying. Dad said he was installing cameras and an alarm system first thing in the morning. A few days later, my parents got a call from the police. They found him. The guy's name was Robert. They caught him the next morning, hiding out in a camper about 13 miles from our place. Turns out he'd escaped from the Indiana State Psychiatric Hospital 3 days earlier. He had a history of child abuse and had been locked up for the last 5 years. What stuck with me most, what I still see sometimes when I close my eyes, was the look on his face. Those empty, dead eyes staring at me through the kitchen window that night. My name is Jack. 2 years ago, after a divorce and losing my job at an insurance company in Los Angeles, I decided to search for peace. Alaska seemed like the perfect choice, a wild, sparsely populated land where I could forget the troubles of life. I bought a 2-story log cabin, 30 miles from the nearest town, nestled deep in a vast pine forest. The house was old but sturdy, with large windows that looked out over lush green treetops. The area wasn't as deserted as I had imagined. Besides my place, there were a few other homes scattered within a few miles, owned by year-round locals or people who used them as vacation homes. I loved the mornings on my porch, sipping coffee and watching the sun peek through the treetops. Life here was simple, and I began to feel like I was slowly healing. My closest neighbor was Thomas, a middle-aged man who lived half a mile away. He was tall, silver-haired, and always wore a navy blue knit cap. The cap looked worn, but it had style, almost like it was part of his identity. I once joked that if he ever didn't want it anymore, I'd gladly buy it from him. Thomas was friendly, often dropping by and helping me settle into this new way of life. For the first 3 months, life was peaceful. I'd get up early, drink coffee on the porch, and watch the sun rise over the trees. In the afternoons, I'd read or hike through the forest. Thomas would visit 2 or 3 times a week, always bringing along interesting stories about life in the wild. Everything changed on a night in October. I woke up to strange noises coming from downstairs. The clock read 2:17 a.m. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sounds had a rhythm, like footsteps, someone trying to move quietly. My heart pounded. I moved toward the door and listened carefully. I heard soft clinking sounds. Someone was inside. I slowly opened the door, crept into the hallway, and looked down. Through the window slats, I saw a flashlight beam sweeping across the living room. There were 2 of them. Panic surged through me. I had no weapon in the bedroom. My hunting rifle was in a closet downstairs. If they found it, that would be a nightmare. I crawled to the corner of the room and hid behind an old wooden wardrobe. From there, I could see the stairs through a small crack in the door. A tall, thin figure in a black hoodie moved slowly through the living room, shining a flashlight around like he knew the layout. I couldn't see the second person, but I heard footsteps coming from the kitchen. Cold sweat trickled down my back. In my panic, I glanced out the window. At the edge of the forest, maybe 20 meters from the house, a figure stood perfectly still. He was tall and wore a knit cap. It looked just like Thomas's. He didn't move, just stood there, watching the house. A chill ran down my spine. Thomas, I wondered, but I couldn't trust what I was seeing. Suddenly, the footsteps downstairs got closer to the stairs. I quickly slipped into the closet and pulled the door almost shut, leaving a small crack. Through it, I saw the flashlight beam enter the bedroom. The light swept across the bed, the desk, then stopped right in front of the closet. I held my breath, biting my lip to stay silent. The man stepped into the room, his heavy boots thudding on the wooden floor. He paused, checked under the bed, then turned and walked back out. Just then, red and blue police lights flashed from a distance. Later, I learned that a neighbor a few miles away had seen suspicious people heading toward my house and called the police. I heard the intruder's footsteps pounding down the stairs. The back door slammed. Then, silence. The police searched the house and the surrounding woods. They caught one of the intruders, a guy around 30, with a creepy grin. The other 2 got away. When the officer asked me for details, I told him everything, including the figure at the edge of the forest wearing the knit cap. But when they checked, there were no footprints, no trace at all. I began to wonder if I had imagined the figure. The police said the others might come back, so they arranged for me to stay at a small motel in town for a few days, with an officer checking in regularly. I brought only a few personal items, but the unease stayed with me. I sat in the motel room, gripping my hunting rifle, eyes fixed on the window. The next morning, I decided to find Thomas. I needed to talk to someone. He was the only person I trusted out there, but Thomas's house was empty. No car in the garage, no lights. I knocked, called his name, nothing. He was gone. The following days were filled with anxiety. I began to suspect Thomas. The knit cap, his build, and his sudden disappearance. It was all too much of a coincidence. I dug through my memories, trying to recall if he had ever asked strange questions or acted suspiciously. But all I could remember were his friendly smiles and stories about Alaska. Was he really who I thought he was? A week after the break-in, I contacted the real estate company. I needed to sell the house immediately. Now, I live in a small apartment in Portland. I have a new job, a stable life. But sometimes, on dark nights, I still feel like someone's watching me through the window. And I still wonder, where is Thomas now? I'm Naomi, 15 years old. That evening was a Saturday night. My parents were out at a friend's birthday party and wouldn't be back until late. I was sitting on the sofa in the living room, watching a comedy. Abby, our 7-year-old dog, was curled up beside my feet. Everything was peaceful until 9 o'clock. I heard a noise from outside. Abby heard it too and lifted her head. I muted the TV and listened. It was just the sound of the wind blowing through the branches of the maple tree outside. I was about to turn the sound back on when Abby suddenly jumped up. Her ears stood up and she stared toward the front door. I turned off the TV completely and everything went silent. The sound of slow footsteps came clearly through the stillness. Someone was walking from the driveway, across the front yard, then toward the side of the house. I stood up, my legs shaking. Looking through the living room window, I saw the front yard lit up by the lights. There was no one out there, but the footsteps continued, now coming from the back of the house. Abby walked toward the front door, her fur standing on end. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Maybe it's just a neighbor walking their dog. But why would he walk into my yard? The footsteps stopped somewhere behind the house. I waited, counting my heartbeat. A moment later, I heard the sound of metal clinking. Abby started growling. It definitely wasn't the neighbor, like I had thought. Abby never reacts like this to familiar people. I quietly moved to the kitchen, where there was a small window above the sink facing the backyard. Everything was dark. The sound of metal came again. This time it was clearer. Someone was messing with the back door lock. I moved closer to the wall and slowly peered through the corner of the window. The motion sensor light in the backyard suddenly turned on, bright as day. I saw the back of a tall man in a black coat, wearing a knitted hat covering his face. He was holding a long metal bar, trying to pry open the back door lock. I froze, stunned. He was a burglar, or worse. I backed away, leaning against the refrigerator. My hands were trembling. I needed to call 911 right away, but I couldn't find my phone. I put my hands on my head, trying to remember where I had left it. The sound of metal scraping against the lock continued. He seemed to be getting impatient. Abby ran into the kitchen, looking up at me, still growling toward the back door. I hugged Abby's neck, whispering, "Shh, Abby, don't make a sound." But Abby wouldn't listen, her growling getting louder. The scraping noise immediately stopped. I held my breath. He knew someone was inside. A few seconds passed, and I heard heavy footsteps on the wooden stairs at the back of the house. He was walking down to the backyard, leaving the back door, but I knew he wasn't leaving. The footsteps moved from the backyard to the side of the house. He was walking around checking other entrances. I heard him try pushing against the window frame. It was locked, but he was still trying. Then he moved to the living room window. Abby barked sharply. I rushed to cover her mouth, but it was too late. The footsteps stopped at the living room window. I imagined he was standing out there, staring through the glass, knowing for sure someone was home. My heart pounded harder and harder. I had to do something. Then suddenly, I remembered my dad's gun. He keeps it in the closet in their bedroom. The footsteps started again. Now he was in front of the house. I didn't have much time to hesitate. I picked up Abby and ran down the hall to my parents' bedroom and opened the closet. I felt a little safer. My dad's old shoebox was at the bottom of the closet. I opened it. Inside was a small handgun next to a box of bullets. I picked it up and checked the magazine like I had seen my dad do. 6 rounds, all there. I took the safety off, my hands still shaking. Abby was standing by the door, looking toward the stairs with her ears perked up. The scraping from the basement started again. The basement door was old, and the lock wasn't very secure. If he kept at it, he could open it. Abby ran toward the basement stairs, barking loudly. Her barking echoed through the house like an alarm system. The scraping from the basement grew louder. I looked at the gun in my hand. If he came in, if he meant to hurt me, would I be able to pull the trigger? The scraping stopped. Abby stopped barking but was still growling. I listened. There were no footsteps from the basement. He hadn't entered the house. Instead, I heard heavy footsteps moving outside, climbing the concrete steps leading from the basement door to the yard. He had given up. I collapsed onto the bedroom floor, leaning against the bed. Abby ran up to me, licking my face. I held her tightly, feeling her warmth. Now, I needed to call the police. The phone had to be somewhere under the living room couch. I ran downstairs and found it in the corner of the sofa. But before I pressed the call button, I heard a car engine from far away. The headlights shone through the living room window. The car was turning into our driveway. My parents were home. I still didn't dare open the door to run outside. I just stood still, listening. But Abby had noticed, her tail wagging furiously. My parents stepped into the house through the garage door, talking about the party. "Sarah, are you asleep?" my mom called. I ran to them, still holding the gun in my hand. When my parents saw me like that, their smiles immediately disappeared. "Sweetheart, what's going on?" my dad asked, quickly taking the gun from my hand. I told them everything, my voice shaking. My dad turned on the back porch light and grabbed a flashlight to check around the house. We called the police. 2 officers arrived, took my statement, and checked the house. The basement door and the back door showed signs of tampering. It was likely that someone was testing out which house was easy to break into. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with Abby curled up next to me, listening to every sound outside. The next morning, I went down to the kitchen and overheard a conversation between Uncle Peter and my dad on the phone. "Jack, I stopped by your place last night, but no one answered the door." My dad was silent for a while. "Did you do anything there, Peter?" "Well, I just wanted to leave a thank you card and a gift card for Sarah. She helped me with my presentation last week and I just got promoted." "Did you try any of the doors?" "No, I just left the card and left." My dad and I looked at each other in silence. So the first footsteps were from Uncle Pete, and the one who tried to pry open the lock and walk around my house came later. I shuddered as I realized, if Uncle Pete hadn't come first, I might not have been alert in time. It's chilling to think about. I'm Kathleen, been working as an ER nurse for over 10 years. Blood, screams, sudden deaths, the way families look at you when you give them the worst news. I've seen it all. I've dealt with every kind of tragedy you can imagine. Brutal accidents, violent injuries, bodies so burned you wouldn't even know they were human. But nothing has ever scared me like that night did. It was around 2 a.m. when they brought the 3 girls in. The police had just rescued them from some kidnapper. I got the usual basic info when the call came in, but no real details about what happened. All I knew was they'd been trapped for a long time in some basement. The second the ambulance pulled up, my team and I rushed to the intake area. And the first thing that hit me, they all looked almost exactly the same. It wasn't just how thin and pale they were, it was their eyes, that weird grayish blue with little specks scattered in the irises, almost identical. They didn't say a word. When I asked their names, all three just stared at me, mouths slightly open, but nothing came out. I shot a glance at Laura, the nurse on duty. She looked just as confused as I was. We tried different ways to communicate, but all we got were slow, almost robotic movements. We moved them to the exam room. When I lifted one girl's shirt for a quick check, there was something strange. Right between her shoulder blades was a bump, like something was lodged under her skin. I turned to the other two, and a chill ran through me when I saw they had the exact same thing. Laura's face said it all. She was just as freaked out as I was. I told Laura to stay calm, said it was probably just some kind of deformity or injury. She asked, "Then why do they all have the same exact thing?" I didn't have an answer, just kept quiet. I took their blood samples, sent them off for testing. The results came back faster than I expected, completely normal. No diseases, no drugs, nothing. I stared at the perfect test results, and a chill ran up my spine. Nothing wrong. And somehow, that was the strangest part. A little while later, I noticed their hair starting to fall out. At first, just a few strands on the pillows. But when I looked away for a few minutes and turned back, clumps of it had fallen on their shoulders, on the floor, scattered across the white hospital sheets. None of them reacted. They just sat there, like they didn't even realize what was happening to their own bodies. Laura and I exchanged another worried look. We had a million questions and no answers. But the weirdest part hadn't even happened yet. When the doctor ordered a full exam, I helped them change into hospital scrubs, and the second I pulled down their clothes, it felt like the ground dropped out from under me. No genitals, no anus, nothing. No sign of any reproductive or excretory organs at all. Just smooth, seamless skin, like mannequins. But alive. I froze. My whole body locked up. Behind me, I heard Laura suck in a sharp breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the hospital bed like she might collapse. We just stood there, completely still, unable to process what we were seeing. And the girls, they didn't react. Didn't even seem to realize anything was wrong. They just sat there, those blue-gray eyes staring blankly into nothing. I took a step back. In 10 years of seeing the worst horrors imaginable, nothing haunted me like this. It couldn't be real. There was no way a human being could exist like this. I looked at the bumps on their backs, the hair falling out, those identical, unnatural eyes. And then, a terrifying thought hit me. These weren't just three ordinary people. What the hell were they? Some kind of artificial creation? Just as I was about to turn away, one of the girls tilted her head in this slow, unnatural way, like she was studying me. Then she smiled. That pale, eerie smile. Laura and I bolted. We ran out of that hospital room so fast we nearly slammed into the door, then tore down the hallway straight to the director's office. Neither of us said a word. Not yet. It took me a few seconds just to catch my breath. My voice shook as I tried to explain everything I had just seen. The director stared at us, eyes wide, but he pulled himself together fast. He told us to keep quiet, said we couldn't risk causing panic among the staff and patients. My whole body was still trembling. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like my chest was caving in. Keep it a secret? How the hell was I supposed to stay quiet about that? I glanced at Laura. She was pale, gripping the hem of her dress so tightly her knuckles were white. That night dragged on forever. We sat in the on-call room, both of us drowning in silence, lost in our own fears. The next afternoon, when I came in for my shift, I spotted the director out back, talking to some guy I didn't recognize. A pickup truck was parked next to them. A few minutes later, the man got into the truck and drove off, the director watching him with a satisfied look in his eyes. The 3 girls were gone. No discharge records, no explanation. When I asked, the director just shrugged and said they'd been transferred to another hospital for treatment. Laura and I quit. We thought about reporting what happened, but what could we even say? We had no real proof, just a story that, to anyone else, would sound like we were losing our minds. I walked away from a steady job, from years of experience, because I couldn't shake the horror of it. And every time I think about that last smile, a chill creeps down my spine all over again.
I'm JC, 20 years old. I have a brother named Nathan who's 2 years older than me. We didn't get a lot of love growing up. My mom passed away early because of a serious illness, and my dad started drinking because he was so heartbroken. He was often drunk and would hit us for no reason. Nathan was pretty thin and just a bit taller than me. He was always getting picked on by his friends, and the ringleader of that annoying group was Frank. Frank was a head taller than him and almost twice as heavy. He never cried. He always stood up to the tough hits, but in the end, he still ended up losing. 10 years ago, when we were 10 and 12, the city kept reporting about kids going missing. 3 high school kids had gone missing, and they still hadn't been found. People were very scared and confused. Buses to school started coming less and less often. All our classmates had their parents pick them up and drop them off to make sure they stayed safe. Only Chris and we were left. He'd just moved into Nathan's class. Unlike Nathan, who's kind of small and frail, Chris is tall and healthy. We started getting closer over time, so we weren't as lonely, and Chris also looked out for Nathan. It's been 2 weeks since the first person went missing, and the police still hadn't found either the victim or the culprit. One day at school, Chris wasn't on the bus. I said, "Chris must not be feeling well today." But Nathan looked really worried. That day turned into a nightmare for Nathan. Since Frank hadn't seen Chris, he took it out on Nathan, hitting him as a kind of catch-up for the past few days. I rushed in to protect Nathan with all the strength I had. After that fight, we were both covered in bruises. We were still pretty happy and felt really brave. The next morning, when we got to school, we were shocked to hear that Chris was the kidnapper's next victim. I could see how worried Nathan was. He didn't talk or laugh for the next few days. Nathan went back to being bullied and just gave up. A week later, Frank was the next victim. Frank's disappearance showed just how clever the kidnapper was. Frank vanished the moment he ran to his car after school. I know it sounds bad, but I was actually relieved when Frank got kidnapped. One day I woke up from a nightmare, yelling Nathan's name and searching the whole house for him. I didn't feel relieved until I saw that Nathan was safe. I had a dream that Nathan was the next kidnapper's victim. He vanished into a bunch of black balloons right in front of the school gate. Another time, I dreamed about a guy in black holding a bunch of black balloons. He had a creepy mask on and a wicked smile. I told Nathan and my classmates about my weird dreams, and I thought they might be the kidnappers. But no one took my dreams seriously. One day, right after we finished school, 2 police showed up. They wanted to talk to me and share some info. They found the first kidnapping victim, but the boy had already passed away. The boy was holding on to bits of black rubber, which they think came from the balloons. At the spot where Frank was kidnapped, they also found several black balls stuck in the trees. The police asked me if I knew anything else about the kidnapping, and I told them it was just random dreams. After the police left, my dad lost it and started hitting me. Nathan did his best to stop, He hugged me tight to keep me safe. After that beating, Nathan ran out of the house. I saw him quickly wipe away his tears. I tried to call Nathan and chase after him, but my dad stopped me and locked me in my room. Just like in my dream, Nathan vanished, and there were 13 black balloons hanging by the gate. I cried a lot and was really mad at my dad. I blamed him for not caring about us and wondered why we didn't get any love from him. Later, when I got older, I understood how much my dad loved my mom. I kept calling the police station to check on the status of the investigation into Nathan's whereabouts. By the end of each call, I was getting more and more frustrated. A week later, I went back to school, but I couldn't focus on anything. I was shocked to see a bunch of black balloons pinned up on the board. But within a few seconds, the teacher turned off the projector to end the class. I had a lot of questions running through my mind. Suddenly, I heard the teacher and a few friends laughing. I heard some laughter that seemed a bit familiar, but I quickly forgot about it. At night, I took my pillow into Nathan's room to sleep. I'd always ask God to protect him and bring him back home. I had another dream about that weird guy standing in front of a house with a creepy smile, holding a bunch of black balloons. 1300 Pennsylvania is the address of that house. I quickly jotted down the address, thought about it for a bit, and decided to check out that house. It was a small house on a winding road, way at the end and kind of isolated. The house was empty, and when I peeked through the window, I saw that the furniture inside was old and pretty messy. I noticed there were a ton of black balloons inside. I could hear loud rattling noises coming from the basement. I grabbed a stick lying nearby, tapped it on the windowsill, and waited nervously. I heard a faint knocking sound coming from somewhere. I was sure it was Nathan. We came up with that sound to recognize each other. I quickly searched around the house, but I was startled and screamed loudly when that strange man suddenly appeared. He laughed loudly and quickly grabbed me. I jumped up, surrounded by Nathan's room, and slapped myself in the face to make sure I wasn't dreaming. It was almost dawn, so I called the police right away. I gave them the address, described the house, and told them about the strange man from my dream. But my hopes were completely crushed when the police told me the address I gave them didn't exist. It's been 10 years, and the search for Nathan and the other victims has stopped. This year he would have been 22, graduating from college and looking forward to a bright future. Where is he? Is he living under a different name and with a new look? I never lost hope that Nathan was still out there and that he'd come back someday.
Daniel Carter had been running a Popeyes in Louisiana for years. He still couldn't shake the madness of the 2019 chicken sandwich craze, people brawling, even killing each other over a damn sandwich. His job paid the bills, and life was all right, but he was getting real tired of the fast food grind and the mess it left behind. Come 2022, Popeyes was rolling out a new burger, and Daniel got an invite to a hush-hush tasting for upper management. He had a bad feeling about it, but the bonus was too good to pass up, so he signed on. The second he stepped into the testing facility, something felt off. The place looked like a rundown warehouse, chipped paint, no sign out front, just sketchy all around. Inside, in a big testing room, about 10 other Popeyes managers were already waiting. A guy with slicked back hair and glasses stepped up and called himself Peter, said he's from corporate and would be running the test. Before anything started, Peter rolled a video of the first batch of testers. The video started with a group of people trying the burger. At first, they raved about how good it tasted, but after a few minutes, things got weird. They started fiending for it like addicts. Some even hurt themselves just to get another bite. One guy straight up bit his own hand, when there was no more burger left. By the end of the video, it was total chaos. People clawing at each other, fighting, screaming. The research team had to pump in anesthetic gas just to get things under control. Even after seeing that nightmare unfold, the managers still had to take a bite. They had signed an NDA, so backing out wasn't an option. The burger looked incredible, and there was something about the smell. It was almost hypnotic. The moment Daniel took a bite, it melted in his mouth. It was so damn good. It felt like the best thing he had ever eaten. But that bliss didn't last. A weird, creeping hunger started curling through his body. Each bite wasn't just satisfying, it messed with his head. He felt himself slipping, losing control, like he wasn't even the one making the choice to keep eating. Everything around him blurred, and the only thing on his mind was the burger sitting in front of him. In just a few minutes, the whole vibe in the room flipped. Eyes went wild. The people who had been keeping it together a second ago suddenly lunged at each other, scrambling for every last piece of the burger. They clawed and fought like starving animals. Daniel looked around, his head spinning. His hand shot out, grabbing what was left on the table. He couldn't stop himself. His hands turned shaky and clumsy, and the only thing left in his mind was that overwhelming, uncontrollable craving. The room exploded into chaos. The managers shoved, fought, scratched, anything to get more food. Daniel felt dizzy, realizing he was clawing at the burger on the table, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop. A guy straight up punched his colleague in the face for just a tiny piece of the burger. Peter slammed the emergency button, and the room filled with anesthetic gas. Everything started fading. The last thing Daniel saw was people screaming and thrashing on the floor before everything went black. When he came to, he was strapped to a chair in a dark room. Peter strolled in, looking way too calm, and said the burger was a breakthrough product, but the formula still wasn't perfect. He explained that a special additive in the burger messed with the part of the brain that controls hunger, making people obsessed with food. Daniel asked him why the hell he'd create something so dangerous. Peter just smiled. Why do you think the 2019 chicken sandwich craze had people fighting? That was a test run, and it brought in insane sales. Peter was completely smug about trying to create a truly addictive product, something that would force customers to keep coming back for more. Peter wasn't just some marketing guy. He had studied human behavior and had even been involved in experiments on the power of addiction. Peter placed another burger in front of Daniel, saying the formula had been tweaked and he was the only one who could test it. If he ate it, he could become part of the new research and get anything he wanted. As Peter stepped out of the room, Daniel spotted a small key on the table. He cut himself free and bolted. On his way out, he passed several rooms where previous test subjects were locked up, screaming and begging for more food. Daniel managed to escape the facility, but once he got home, the taste of the burger wouldn't leave his mind. He knew he was being manipulated, but the craving refused to let go. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his co-workers from the test room, screaming, reaching out for him. The hunger never faded. In fact, it got stronger with each passing day. The faces of the test subjects, their bruised and desperate expressions, kept flashing in his mind. When he opened the fridge, his eyes landed on the simple, ordinary food inside. But no, it wasn't enough. For a split second, he swore he saw the burger's silhouette right in front of him, calling to him, impossible to ignore. One night, a package showed up from Popeyes. Inside was a brand new burger and a note, a taste you can't resist. Eat it. Daniel stood there, torn between taking a bite or getting rid of it for good.
I'm Isaac, 28, and I live in San Antonio, Texas. Born and raised in Texas, I and everyone around here were proud of Whataburger. It's like a state symbol, I was hooked on Whataburger. Everything on the menu drove me wild. Thanks to that obsession, I'd got a bit of a hefty look, 6'2" and 264 pounds. Even though I was kind of self-conscious about it, I just couldn't change how I eat. Eating Whataburger got me more hyped and happy than anything, so it was on my menu at least once a day. I moved at the end of last summer just to be close to a Whataburger. Since then, my once toned body turned into what it is now in just 4 months. I knew every location, recognized all the faces, and was tight with the owner and staff. One thing that was special about the Whataburger near my place was it was packed with other folks who were also pretty heavy. They came to eat every day too, and we'd become this special group the owner really liked. Out of everyone, I was tight with this guy my age named David, who also moved close just for this place, like I did. David showed me his pics from just 5 months ago. "Man, you were in perfect shape. I mean, used to be." I blurted out when I saw those pics, and we both cracked up. "Yeah, but after that first taste of the sandwiches and burgers here, I got totally hooked," David said with a hint of regret. Me, David, and a bunch of others in the group all felt the same way. But we were not trying to lose weight. Not being able to eat Whataburger would be pure torture. Just so you know, the store owner weighed close to 400 pounds. A few months later, my life totally changed when I met Glenda, my first real crush after a bunch of unrequited love. Glenda's cute and lives a healthy, balanced life. She also hooked me up with a diet and kicked off my weight loss journey for real. I had to cut back on how many days I was eating Whataburger each week, and it was honestly brutal. Me or that burger? Glenda shot me a look when she spotted the beef burger I had secretly bought on the table. "Come on, Glenda, just this one." "I'm running out of patience," she cut in, growling when I tried to plead. After picking it up, I had to toss the burger away, and it hurt like hell. David's messages and calls were piling up because I'd been MIA more often. I had to spill the beans to David. Not being able to eat at the Whataburger near my place really messed up my mood and personality. It was awful. I was always bummed out, restless, and felt stuck. There was a point when my heart was racing, and I totally lost control of my actions. I yelled at Glenda and started smashing stuff around the house. I even threatened to off myself if she didn't get me Whataburger. "Isaac, are you crazy?" Glenda yelled, squeezing my hand. I got a headache and felt dizzy. Everything in front of me was spinning. The phone rang, and it was someone from my Whataburger addict group. "Isaac, David just passed away." That hit me like a ton of bricks, but my heart started racing like crazy. Glenda and I rushed over to David's place, and the police were already there. David's body was right at the entrance. His face was all purple, and he was stiff with his mouth wide open and eyes staring. Inside David's house, police found a ton of trash, mostly food and Whataburger cans everywhere. In David's airway, the forensics team pulled out a bunch of food that wasn't chewed right, and a piece of a chicken bone, which caused him to choke and die. The autopsy showed that David had been exposed to some addictive stuff found in the food at Whataburger. The addictive stuff built up over a bunch of days, making David's appetite go wild and totally out of control. Right after David died, 5 more people from the group ended up in the hospital in really bad shape. Police went to the Whataburger to check things out and found the owner's decomposing body in the back room. To rake in a ton of cash from the store's huge monthly sales, he mixed in some addictive stuff with the ingredients. David, I and a bunch of other folks with the same interests, eating habits, and big appearances are his success. We wasted our money making that bastard rich while also buying ourselves a disease that was wrecking our bodies every single day. I was in shock and totally crushed. The next few days were just hell. I was going through therapy, detox, and trying to lose weight all at once. But thanks to Glenda, my rock and support, I pulled it off. I had to go through a bunch more surgeries after losing weight, but when I looked in the mirror, I just broke down in tears like I'd been reborn. Today, Glenda and I went to visit David's grave to tell him about the wedding we were planning.
Have you ever witnessed a shooting? That is a memory from when I was 14 that my family and I will never forget. I am Tunner, and that terrifying story happened 15 years ago. My family and I lived in a small house in Tacoma, Washington. I have a close friend named Dennis. He lives with his grandmother and uncle in the house across from my family. It was a Sunday, and we had planned to ride our bikes to the edge of the forest near our house. It was a mischievous activity that Dennis and I often did when we had free time. At the scheduled time, I stood in front of the door, looking over at Dennis's house. After about 15 minutes of not seeing him, I was considering running over to Dennis's house to call him directly. I wondered why I hesitated instead of just running over, especially since the two houses were only separated by a small road. Because Dennis's uncle was extremely unpleasant and aggressive. His uncle Robbie had a bald, shiny head covered in tattoos instead of hair, and a muscular body often clad in the same sleeveless shirt. Many times my family heard Robbie shouting and cursing at Dennis, and sometimes even at his grandmother. My parents were also uncomfortable with me playing with Dennis. They always told me never to go to his house, and that I could only hang out with him freely when he was outside. I was about to go inside to use the landline to call Dennis after waiting for more than 20 minutes. Suddenly, "No, stop!" Dennis's loud shout startled me. Then came a series of shouts from Dennis, mixed with his uncle cursing, and echoed through the air. Dennis's cries and the sound of his grandmother continuously begging filled the air. I froze for a few minutes, then decided I would run over to his house. "Tunner!" My dad, calling me in a serious tone, echoed from inside the house. I froze in place, and immediately a strong force from my dad's firm arm pulled me back into the house. My dad locked the door, and I was frantic as Dennis's cries continued, accompanied by several more loud bangs. "Dad, Dennis is being abused again. I have to help him." "Tunner, Robbie has a gun. It's very dangerous if you go outside. I will call the police right now, so stay here, okay?" My dad emphasized each word and looked at me with a very serious expression. I turned my gaze toward Dennis's house through the crack in the door, and the gunshots my dad had mentioned occasionally echoed loudly. "There is a domestic violence situation. Please come as quickly as possible. There is an elderly woman nearly 70 and a 14-year-old boy inside. The elderly woman's son has a gun and he's losing control. I'm the neighbor across the street. Please come here as fast as you can." I could hear the urgency and worry in my dad's voice. "Everything is going to be okay." My dad placed his hand on my shoulder, and for the moment, the gunshots had stopped. Less than 10 minutes later, the sound of police sirens appeared. Standing inside the house, my dad and I witnessed the entire incident unfold. "Robbie! Robbie!" A police officer stood at the side of my house, calling out loudly for Dennis's uncle. "Don't call my name anymore, okay? We're not friends, so stop calling my name. Get lost, you damn bastards." Robbie's voice was full of curses, and because they knew he had a gun, the police couldn't rush in. My dad explained it like that. "Show me your hands, buddy. Come out here and talk to me." The police officer was quite calm and patient. As soon as the police officer finished speaking, my dad immediately grabbed my hand and pulled me into the kitchen, hiding us under the kitchen cabinet. He covered my ears tightly with his hands. My heart was pounding hard, overwhelmed by the chaos of gunshots, the sound of windows shattering, neighbors screaming out the names of their loved ones, and police officers shouting information to their colleagues for coordination. In that very moment, all I could do was pray for everything to end quickly. Robbie continued to fire shots and curse at the police with vulgar words, disregarding the safety of everyone around him. The gunfire momentarily stopped, and my dad and I slowly stood up, cautiously looking around. Suddenly, there was a loud banging on the door, followed by a loud call. "Devlin, can I borrow your car?" My dad and I jumped in shock. It was Robbie. Through the crack in the door, I could see him holding a long gun in his hands. My dad signaled for silence. After a moment of no response, Robbie left. I wanted to run over to Dennis's house immediately, but my dad stopped me. The ambulance arrived and took Dennis and his grandmother away shortly after. The eerie silence enveloped the entire street. By that evening, we received news that Robbie had been shot and killed by a police officer shortly afterward. The memory of the gunshots, the chaos, and the feeling of helplessness from that day still lingers deeply in my mind, and Dennis's. The story is based on a true event that occurred in 2022 in Tacoma, Washington, USA. The local police received a call reporting a domestic violence incident from a nephew who accused his own uncle. The boy made sure to remind the police that his uncle owned firearms. The suspect, Peter, opened fire continuously after the police arrived, disregarding the safety of the surrounding residents. Additional information from the police revealed that Peter had a history of violent crime. He was convicted of first-degree assault in 2009 for repeatedly beating his pregnant girlfriend, who was 7 months pregnant, causing her permanent injuries. On the same day as the shooting incident, Peter was shot and fatally wounded by a police officer, and he passed away shortly thereafter.
"Mommy, can a child live in a trash can?" That was an innocent question from my son, but it haunted me ever since I learned the story of a monstrous mother. I am a single mother living with my 5-year-old son in a small neighborhood. Everyone here is very friendly, except for the house right next to mine. I found out that the owner of that house is also a single mother named Hebe, with 5 young children, 4 daughters and a youngest son, who is the same age as my son. She was described by the neighbors as someone with a selfish lifestyle. I met her a few times, but my greetings were ignored and met with a very cold attitude. Several times, loud arguments could be heard coming from Hebe's house at night between her and another man. I guessed that he was the father of one of her 5 children, as they did not resemble each other. One day, I was busy preparing dinner in the kitchen and left my son to play alone in the living room. A moment later, the boy ran over and hugged my leg, saying, "Mommy." I replied to my son while still focusing on cooking, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "Mom, can a child live in a trash can?" My son's innocent question made me laugh. If there are a lot of ugly bacteria, why would you want to live in there? I don't want to, but the boy next door does. Then you should advise your friend not to do that. I brushed off my son's question and quickly finished making dinner. After dinner, I worked while my son watched TV. When I glanced at my son, I was a bit surprised to see him watching images of trash cans. "Honey, what are you watching?" The boy didn't respond. His face was very pensive, and his eyes were fixed on the TV screen. "Are you trying to learn about something? Being inside there must be really cramped. And there are no candles, toys, or even a TV, Mom." My son's voice was very sad. "Who are you talking about?" "It is about the friend from next door." "There's no way that would happen, Mikey. Every baby deserves to be loved." I smiled, knowing my little boy had grown and had the sensitivity of a 5-year-old. I took my son to his room, kissed him goodnight, and then returned to my own room. I didn't go to sleep right away. I finished up some work first. About 10 minutes later, my son cried out loudly in a panic. I didn't have time to react before the boy opened the door, ran to me, and hugged me tightly while crying a lot. "Mom, please save him. He'll be hungry in the trash can." I look at my son in shock. I didn't rush to ask my son questions. Instead, I comforted him first. Once my son calmed down, he recounted everything that had happened. From losing his ball in the neighbor's backyard, he had planned to run in quickly and come back since no one was around. "I picked up a plastic bottle in the yard and threw it in the trash can, just as you told me. I saw him in the trash can." Hearing my son's story left me in shock and made me shudder. I immediately called the police because I was sure my son wasn't lying. From the information I gathered, the police had to visit Hebe's house 3 times before uncovering the horrifying truth. She denied having a son, constantly crying and pretending to be pitiful. In the shed in Hebe's backyard, the police found a trash can containing the body of her youngest son. Hebe took advantage of her sad circumstances to register for government assistance using her son's information. Hebe's children were very unfortunate as they received no care or attention from their own mother. Her youngest son died from a high fever that led to seizures and brain damage. After learning of her son's death, she didn't obtain a death certificate or bury him properly, and she didn't seem to grieve at all. Her selfishness and greed were even more disgusting as he'd continued to use her son's information to receive monthly benefits. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but her cold-bloodedness and insensitivity deserved to be locked up forever. It was heartbreaking for the little boy. That innocent soul deserved protection and love instead of being abandoned like that. How could a mother not love her own child? Did she really deserve to be called mom by her 5 children? This story is based on a true event that occurred in Rock Island, Illinois on July 25th, 2023. The police received the tip-off from a neighbor who claimed that the woman next door was hiding the long-dead body of her son in her home. It took a long time for the police to uncover the truth about a selfish, irresponsible mother and her unfortunate little boy. I'm Marcus, and my wife Stella. We live in Austin, Texas. We've been happily married for 10 years, got good jobs we both love, and a steady income. My wife and I have spent a ton of money over the years trying to find our little angel. We've been willing to try it all. The big hospitals, small clinics, and all the latest reproductive treatments. God must have seen how hard we tried, because after 4 years, Stella and I just broke down and hugged each other tight when we saw those 2 lines on the pregnancy test. But then, "Marcus!" Stella yelled, totally freaking out, and it made me jump. I looked around and couldn't find Stella. The bathroom light was on, and my wife was just crying her eyes out. I rushed into the bathroom, and my heart dropped when I saw Stella sitting on the floor in a pool of blood. So, That little angel was only with us for less than 2 months. I didn't even get to find out the baby's gender yet, Stella said, crying and holding the ultrasound photo close. It was a huge shock for my wife and me, going from hope to happiness, and then suddenly crashing down to disappointment and sadness. After we lost our kid, Stella locked herself in her room all day, just crying and feeling miserable. She stopped taking care of herself and our family like she used to. Every time she got home from work, the whole gloomy vibe made me feel really suffocated. Stella, how about we have a fun day out this weekend? Where do you want to go and what do you want to eat? Joy Toy, can you take me there? Stella said with a straight face. Of course. I was a bit surprised, but honestly, I just wanted to make Stella feel better, so I was down to go wherever she wanted. On Saturday morning, Stella got all dressed up and put on some light makeup for our outing. Seeing my wife looking fresh and happy again made me really happy. We started to head out. 403 West 2nd Street. It's about a 30-minute drive from here, honey. Stella didn't say anything. She just stared out the window. It's been a while since we had a date, so I see you're all dressed up and wearing makeup, huh? I teased Stella a little. No. I want to go see our kid. What? I said, turning to Stella, totally surprised. She didn't say anything more. I had a ton of questions buzzing around in my head, and they just kept piling up every minute until I got to the Joy Toy store. As soon as the car stopped, Stella jumped out and rushed into the store, totally ignoring me yelling after her. I quickly hopped out and dashed into the store, checking out the big, colorful space. Stella! Stella, where are you? I just yelled out. As I zipped along the toy shelves, I glanced around and suddenly got chills. The lullaby was soft and sad, kinda like a cold wind. It crept through the toys with big eyes and a smile, giving me the creeps. Stella! I yelled when I saw my wife holding a doll and softly singing a lullaby. I went to stop my wife because the other guests were giving her weird looks and whispering. Stella, what are you doing? I whispered. Marcus, keep it down. Mikey's sleeping, my wife said, giving me a disapproving look. What did you say? Mikey? Our son. Look, Stella said, holding the doll out to me. He's got my eyes, right? Stella, stop. What are you doing? My wife didn't even catch the end of what I said. She just hugged the doll and took off. I quickly ran to pay for it and then chased after her. From that moment on, my life officially turned into a total nightmare. Stella was happy and laughing again, but not with me. She was with her Mikey doll. Slowly but surely, my house got filled up with toys and boys' clothes in all shades of blue. One night, I turned to hug my wife, but in my dream, I just didn't feel her warmth next to me. A white figure with a creepy humming sound was swaying back and forth right in front of me. I freaked out, jumped up, screamed, and started frantically looking for the light switch. Turns out it was my wife. She was singing a lullaby to her little son. I felt totally helpless, and my heart was still racing with fear. For a bunch of nights in a row, I was always sleeping on edge, feeling panicky. That really messed with my nerves big time. Little by little, I started hearing kids crying and laughing, and the sounds of toys turning on. It felt like there was a real kid living in the house, even though I was all alone. Everywhere I looked, There were these colorful, cute toys with big round eyes that were dark and deep, and they totally creeped me out. I hated them. One time, I had just come home after work, and my wife was soothing the doll. And the creepiest part, it was crying. My head was spinning, and I opened my eyes wide to take in what was happening in front of me. My wife, looking totally out of it in panic, was trying to soothe this dirty, torn-up doll. I yelled loudly, tried to hold Stella down, shoved her in the back seat, and rushed her to the hospital. The days Stella was in the hospital were also my time to chill and recover. I called in a cleaning crew to tidy up the whole house, tossed out all the toys and kids' stuff, and painted the place a brighter color. Stella got some good therapy and started to chill out. She was dealing with the hurt of losing our kid again. But I felt good because I at least got her to come back. We slowly got past the hurt, got back to work, and started living our lives again, hoping a little angel would show up soon.
I have kept this secret buried for 40 years. It was a horrific night on duty that I still cannot forget. It is the reason I walked away from the police force, despite working so hard to get that job in the first place. I was 21 years old at the time. I had just been hired in a poor, coastal district that lacked almost everything. During a night patrol shift, my partner and I received a call from residents near the South Beach. They said they saw something resembling a body washed up on the sand. We drove to the scene. When we arrived, we froze. It was the naked body of an adult man. Even worse, the corpse had no head. The cut at the neck was jagged, and the seawater had washed the remaining blood to a pale white. Back then, our equipment was primitive. Even the radio in our car was broken. After a quick discussion, we had to split up. My partner would drive back to the station to report and bring the forensics team in the morning, while I had to stay behind to guard the scene. I was young, inexperienced, and desperate to keep my job, so I agreed to stay. I stood a safe distance from the body and kept watch. The night became eerily still. There wasn't a breath of wind, only the steady, rhythmic sound of waves hitting the shore. The silence of the ocean at night has a strange, hypnotic power. I sat on a rock a few yards from the body, straining my eyes into the dark. But after several exhausting shifts, and in that absolute quiet, my mind began to fade. I told myself I'd just close my eyes for a second, but I fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up, the sun hadn't quite risen. My heart stopped when I looked at the spot on the sand. The body was gone. I was in a total panic. If the investigators arrived and the scene was empty, I would be fired or severely disciplined for sleeping on duty. In a desperate frenzy, I ran along the shoreline, hoping the body had just drifted into a nearby rock crevice. After walking a long way, I saw a man crouching behind a large reef. He was holding a small hatchet. I ran toward him, intending to ask if he had seen anything unusual. But the moment he saw me, he looked incredibly guilty. His eyes darted around, and his hands trembled as he tried to hide the axe behind his back. Before I could say a word, he stammered, "I didn't mean to. It was an accident. I just wanted to hide him for a while." I stopped in my tracks, my hand instinctively dropping to my holster. I realized right then that this man was the killer. He had returned in the night to drag the body away while I was asleep. But before I could draw my weapon, he lunged at me like a cornered animal, swinging the hatchet. Everything happened so fast. We struggled, and he attacked me with a crazed strength, clearly trying to eliminate the witness. In a split-second fight for survival, with the blade inches from my neck, I pulled my gun and fired. The bullet hit him square in the forehead. He dropped instantly. It took a long time for me to process what I had done. I looked at the man I had just shot, then out at the empty beach. I had killed a murderer, but I had done it while failing my duty. If I told the truth, my career would be over because I had lost the original crime scene. In a state of pure terror and desperation, I made the darkest decision of my life to save myself. I dragged the killer's body into a hidden crevice and stripped him naked. I used his own hatchet to take his head. I threw the head and his clothes into the deep ocean to erase his identity. Then, I hauled this new, headless body back to the beach and placed it exactly where the first victim had been. My plan was to turn the killer into the victim I was supposed to be guarding. A short while later, when my partner returned with the investigators, I luckily reported that the scene remained untouched. They examined the headless corpse, and since it matched the original description, they never suspected a thing. However, that secret became a life sentence for my soul. To this day, I still don't know where the original victim's body went, whether the killer hid it elsewhere or the tide swept it away. I used a barbaric act to protect my career. I swapped the villain for the victim just to cover up a few minutes of sleep. I resigned from the force shortly after. For 40 years, I have lived with an unquenchable guilt. I constantly wonder who the real victim was and how their family suffered when they vanished without a trace. I will take this secret to my grave, knowing that the justice I swore to protect was strangled by my own hands on that fateful night.
Back then, my parents both worked long hours, so I was raised by a nanny named Carol. She was always there in the afternoons, carrying a heavy scent of perfume and speaking in a soft, airy voice. Carol didn't teach me normal childhood games like building blocks or coloring. Instead, she told me strange stories, and she constantly talked about the other world. One afternoon, she led me into the bathroom. She told me she was going to teach me a special game called the bathtub game. She was very clear about the rules. First, I had to play alone. No one else could be in the room. Second, I had to mix the water with plenty of soap and a dark liquid she had prepared until the water became so murky that it no longer reflected anything. Third, I had to endure the scalding hot water without crying out in pain, and I wasn't allowed to turn my head, no matter what I heard. And most importantly, I had to believe in what I saw and wait until the light completely disappeared. I asked her what the prize was for winning, and Carol said I would gain freedom. The way she said it made the prize sound irresistible, and I immediately agreed to play. Everything was set. I stepped into the bathtub. The water was painfully hot, but I forced myself to endure it. I sat down, took a deep breath, and slowly submerged my head. As soon as I was underwater, I felt a powerful force pulling me down deeper. I slowly opened my eyes, but the water was cloudy. I couldn't see anything except for a blurry spot where the drain was located. At first, it looked normal, but after a few seconds, the drain began to stretch out like a wide, gaping mouth. It started to vibrate as if it were alive. Around the edges, things that looked like hands appeared. Long, thin, distorted fingers gripping the rim of the drain. I was terrified, nearly forgetting that I was underwater. I opened my mouth to scream and immediately began to choke on the water. I tried to resurface, but a massive weight was pressing down on my back. I spiraled into a panic, my body thrashing instinctively to escape, but the more I struggled, the closer I was pulled toward that hole. Those hands began to move, reaching up toward me slowly. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't think of anything except getting out at any cost. The pressure in my chest felt like it was going to explode. My vision blurred, and then the light truly vanished. Not because I closed my eyes, but because everything around me sank into total darkness. Everything ended abruptly, and I lost all sensation. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My parents were standing beside me, looking incredibly worried. They said I had fainted in the tub due to carelessness, and that I was lucky Carol had found me in time to save me. No one mentioned the game or asked why I did it, and I didn't tell them. But the most haunting part wasn't what I went through. It was the feeling that I had lost. I failed to finish the game, and because of that, I never received the freedom Carol had promised. As I grew up, I tried to recreate that game many times. I followed every step and every rule perfectly, but nothing ever happened. No hands, no pulling force, no widening drain, just normal water and silence. I slowly realized that the door probably only opens once, and I had missed my chance. A few days ago, I told this story to my son. He wasn't scared. Instead, he was fascinated. He asked me about the rules, about Carol, and about the prize. Finally, he asked me if he would win if he did everything right. I didn't answer him. Now, I am standing outside the bathroom door. My son is inside. I heard the sound of water splashing at first, but now everything has gone silent. My hand is on the doorknob. All I have to do is turn it, and I could pull him out and end this right now. A part of me wants to do it immediately, but another part whispers that if I do, I will steal the only chance he has to win the game that I lost. I stand perfectly still, not moving, hardly daring to breathe. My phone is buzzing constantly with calls and texts from my ex-husband because I took our son from his house without permission. But I don't care. My name is Kane. I live in a rural part of West Texas, a place defined by bone-dry fields and long, straight highways that seem to stretch on forever. I have a small family with a wife and a daughter. Our lives would be perfect if I didn't constantly have to clean up the messes made by my younger brother Roger, who just refused to grow up. Roger got hooked on drugs, and that brought a whole mess of trouble. Debt, street fights, and constant lies. 2 days before everything went sideways, he called me asking where he could score. I knew immediately he was looking for meth. I lost my temper, yelled at him, and slammed the phone down. It wasn't our first fight, but it was the meanest thing I'd ever said to him. The next night, I heard he got into a huge blowout with his fiancée and vanished into the night. I wasn't too worried at first because he'd pulled stunts like this before. That changed 2 days later. Near midnight, my phone rang. It was Roger. His voice was frantic and out of breath. He sounded like he was in deep trouble. He said he was driving down Highway 277 and was about to run out of gas. More importantly, he claimed 3 men were hunting him down. My first reaction was doubt. Every time he talked about shadow people or men outside the door, it had always been a drug-induced hallucination. I snapped at him, told him to get his act together, and hung up. But 2 minutes later, the guilt ate at me. I woke up my wife, and we drove out to Highway 277. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep knowing he might be out there. That road is desolate at night. No streetlights, no houses, just empty space. When we got close to the spot Roger described, I saw his car pulled over on the shoulder, looking like it had been abandoned in a massive hurry. I stepped out and called his name, but the only response was the wind. Right then, my phone buzzed. It was Roger again. He whispered that he was close by, watching me. I spun around and scanned the darkness, but I saw absolutely nothing. I asked for his exact location, but his answers were vague and confused. Then, I saw police lights in the distance. I found out later that a passing truck driver had seen the abandoned car and called it in. The moment I told Roger the cops were arriving, his mood flipped. He had an active warrant, so he panicked. He told me not to trust the police and to leave immediately. Then, the line went dead.
I stood there looking at his car, then out at the pitch-black fields, believing he was just hiding in the brush. Once again, I decided to cover for him. I told the officer that my brother had just run out of gas and was walking to find a station. The officer checked the car, found nothing suspicious, and eventually drove off. My wife and I stayed for a while, driving slowly up and down the highway. We called out for Roger and tried his phone dozens of times, but he never picked up again. Exhausted, and assuming he was just hiding until the coast was clear, we eventually went home. The next morning, the car was still there. His fiancée called to say he never made it home. That was when the real fear started to sink in. A massive search was launched. Canine units, helicopters, and infrared cameras scanned every inch of the land surrounding Highway 277. They found nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no Roger. The police eventually concluded that he was intentionally a missing person on the run from his warrant. They searched the area multiple times over the following weeks. Still, not a single clue turned up. 4 days after he vanished, Roger's fiancée checked his phone records and found a chilling detail. That night, Roger had called 911. Given his history, Roger would have avoided the police at all costs. If he called 911, it meant he was truly terrified for his life. When the police played the recording for me, my blood turned to ice. That wasn't the voice of someone tripping on drugs. Roger was screaming, sobbing, and begging for help. He said he was being chased through the fields. Even scarier, in the background of the tape, you could hear the distinct crunching of footsteps on dry grass and the cold, muffled voice of another man right before the call cut out. The last thing my brother ever said was, "They're out here." That was the last time I ever heard his voice. For years, the case went cold. The area was searched again and again with better technology, but it always came up empty. 8 years later, a group of volunteers went back to that same stretch of highway. This time, they found a pair of shorts, a piece of a shoe, and part of a human skull. It was all lying right there in the open field, very close to where the car had been left. DNA tests confirmed it was Roger. We finally found him, or what was left of him. But instead of closure, I only felt more haunted. That entire area had been picked over with a fine-tooth comb by professionals and dogs 8 years prior. There is no way they missed remains lying in plain sight. To this day, I am left with 2 dark theories. First, that every single law enforcement officer and search dog was so blind that they missed a body in a way that is almost impossible to believe. Second, that on that night, Roger was actually taken away to another place. And after many years, the killer, or someone who knew the truth, brought his bones and belongings back to that field and placed them there as a sick, silent taunt. I don't know which part is more terrifying, the silence or the memory. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there, standing next to that empty car in the dead of night. I can still hear Roger's voice whispering through the phone, insisting that he was right here. I blame myself for not doing more to find him at that exact moment. Maybe if I had searched harder, everything would have turned out differently. His final words will haunt me for the rest of my life. "They're out here." And then, everything went silent.
My name is Joseph, and I am 44 years old. By day, I work as a warehouse laborer. By night, I transform into a practicing exorcist. I don't belong to any church. I have no formal training, and I certainly don't have a spiritual calling. What I am actually good at is acting. I've never even believed in demons. What I provide to my clients is nothing more than a placebo, but luckily, most of them feel it works. I was sitting around organizing my schedule for the coming days when I got a call from an unknown number. It was a woman.
She said her son hadn't slept in days, his mental health was collapsing, and he insisted a woman was following him. I've heard these stories 1,000 times. I was sure this client was just a paranoid young guy cracking under work pressure or struggling with addiction. I almost said no because it was nearly 11 p.m., but when she offered triple my usual fee, I suddenly found the energy and headed out. The address was an apartment in an old building on the west side of the city. Ethan's mother was waiting for me in the lobby. She looked exhausted, her eyes red as if she were about to burst into tears. She led me into the apartment where Ethan was sitting on the sofa. Seeing him made me second-guess my assumptions. Ethan looked truly broken. His eyes were sunken, his skin was gray, and the way he kept darting his eyes toward the corner of the room showed his nerves were pushed to the limit. Ethan told me that every night, the woman appeared closer. At first, she was just a blurry shadow at the end of the hallway. Eventually, she stood at his bedroom door, and then right next to his bed. Each time she became clearer, showing a deformed face, swollen eyes, deep purple bruises around her neck, and a wide open mouth. I figured he was just a young man suffering from delusions, though his reaction was a bit more intense than other cases I'd seen. I put on a cold, serious face and began setting the stage. I told Ethan and his mother to sit inside a circle of candles, hold hands, and close their eyes. I strictly warned them that no matter what they heard, they must not let go or open their eyes. I would handle everything. I began mumbling the incantations I had memorized. Suddenly, halfway through the ritual, things spiraled out of control. My whole body jerked violently. I felt a tingling sensation like thousands of needles stabbing me at once. Even though I was still conscious, I couldn't control my own body anymore. Darkness slowly took over, and I accepted it helplessly. In the next few seconds, 3 images flashed before my eyes. First, an old wooden table with a steaming cup of hot chocolate on it. The surface of the liquid was vibrating as if someone were shaking the table. Next, a filthy bedsheet, torn and gripped tight by violent hands. Finally, a silver knife with an incredibly sharp blade. Then, I felt my mouth open. It seemed I was saying something, though I didn't intend to. Then, darkness swallowed me again. I'm not sure how much time passed, but when I woke up, I was lying on the floor. My whole body ached as if I had been jumped by a mob. My throat was burning, and my head throbbed like it was being hit with a hammer. The first thing I noticed was that Ethan was gone. His mother was standing in the corner, her face white and her eyes wide with terror. I sat up and asked where Ethan went, but she could only make quiet, stuttering noises. A moment later, she told me, trembling, that I had acted as if I were possessed. She said while I was chanting, my body suddenly went into violent convulsions. My head snapped up, my mouth opened, and I screamed at Ethan in a high-pitched woman's voice.
"You killed me, and you're going to die the same way."
Ethan had let out a blood-curdling scream, started slapping his own face repeatedly, and then bolted out of the apartment like a madman. I sat there speechless. Of course, I didn't believe in ghosts, but I couldn't deny that I had lost total control of my body and had no idea what I had done. I hurriedly packed my gear and left the apartment, completely forgetting to collect my fee. I threw my bag down when I got home, feeling truly finished with this exorcism business. But I knew I needed the money. I slept until the next afternoon. I went back to my day job, and since everything seemed normal, I brushed the night off as just a bizarre gig. A week later, while I was organizing my fake exorcism schedule, I was interrupted again. This time it wasn't a call, but a knock at the door. 2 police officers were there looking for me. They told me that Ethan had taken his own life with a gun in a hotel room. Even more shocking, his mother had called the police immediately, claiming my exorcism had driven her son insane. I honestly told the police everything that had happened that night. I mentioned the 3 images I had seen. The 2 officers looked at each other in total shock. They told me those details matched the crime scene of a murdered girl named Elsie perfectly. They were suspicious because the details of that investigation hadn't been released to the public yet. They wanted to know how I knew. The crime scene had exactly the 3 details you described, they said. The girl was strangled with a bedsheet. Then she was stabbed with a knife. And on the nightstand, there was a cup of hot chocolate that she hadn't finished drinking. My body went numb hearing their description. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't deny what I had experienced. The investigation eventually concluded that Ethan was indeed the one who had murdered Elsie. It was incredibly strange, but my fake exorcism had provided the crucial clues the police needed to close the case. I deleted all my contact info and ads from every platform. I never dared to call myself a psychic or an exorcist again. I had made a lot of money off the desperation of others, and I realized that was the most sinful and foolish thing I had ever done. I swear I didn't make up those supernatural details, but I can't explain them clearly either. I am haunted by the fact that I mocked the spiritual world, only for the spiritual world to choose me as the bridge to solve a murder.
I'm Lori, and I live with my parents and younger brother in Millfield, Ohio. That night was the 4th of July. I was sitting on the sofa flipping through TV channels when the first firework exploded. Lori, can I have some hot chocolate? My brother Josh called from the kitchen. Hot chocolate in July, are you sure? I chuckled softly, but still got up to make it for him. I was 18 and used to taking care of Josh when my parents were out. My parents had gone to Akron to visit Aunt Margaret because she broke her leg. They'd be back late, probably after midnight. Before they left, Mom had repeatedly told me, "Lock the doors securely, don't open for anyone, and call me right away if anything happens." I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge for milk. I looked out the window. The neighbors' houses were lit up, and the sounds of families laughing and watching fireworks drifted in. "Lori, someone's in the backyard." Josh's voice suddenly turned serious. I turned to see Josh standing by the living room window, the curtain pulled back just a crack. It's probably Mr. Henderson watering his plants. I poured milk into the pot. It's not Mr. Henderson. They're wearing a white lab coat, like a doctor. I turned off the stove and walked to the window. Josh stepped back, his face pale. I looked out. In the dim light from the porch lamp, I saw a figure standing by the fence, their back to me. The man was tall and thin, wearing a white lab coat and black pants. He stood silently, as if observing something. It's probably a doctor from the hospital. Maybe someone got hurt by fireworks. I offered a logical explanation, but my heart started pounding faster. The man turned around. His face was pale, his dark eyes staring directly at the window. He smiled stiffly. "Lori, I know you're in there." His voice echoed through the glass. I flinched, pulling Josh away from the window. The man stepped closer. My blood ran cold. I pulled out my phone, but my hand shook too hard and it fell to the ground. "Lori, I don't want to hurt you." He was now right at the door, placing his hand on the glass. "You wish you could be a better sister, right, Lori?" Josh suddenly burst into tears. "What is he talking about, Lori?" I hugged him tight, my brain spinning, trying to make sense of it. Why would he know that? Suddenly, a loud crash of breaking glass. The man had smashed the kitchen window. He reached in, unlocked it, and climbed into the house. "Run!" I pulled Josh upstairs, my heart pounding like a drum. We ran into my parents' room. I locked the door. "Lori, don't run anymore. I just want to help." His footsteps echoed from downstairs, slow and steady. He wasn't rushing, as if he knew we couldn't escape. Josh trembled in my arms. "Lori, I'm scared. I don't want to die." "You won't die. I'll protect you." I looked around the room for something to defend myself with. In my mom's dresser drawer was a box cutter. I grabbed it, the small blade trembling in my hand. Lori, do you remember the day it happened? The day the stray bullet flew into the playground? The man's voice now sounded like it was right outside the bedroom door. You witnessed Josh die right there. No, I screamed. Josh is still here. He's alive. The man's voice echoed through the wooden door. Lori, you've been living in an illusion for the past 5 years. Josh has been dead for a long time. I looked down at Josh in my arms. He was still trembling, still breathing, still warm. That's not true. Josh is still here. The door opened even though I had locked it securely. The man stepped in. Lori, it's time you face the truth. He reached out to us. I swung the small knife, trying to protect Josh, but when I looked down, my arms were empty. Josh was gone. Light suddenly flooded the room. My mom's voice echoed from downstairs. Lori, we're home. I blinked. The man had vanished. I was sitting alone in my parents' room, the knife stuck in the wooden wall. My parents ran up, their faces full of worry. Lori, what are you doing here? Why are you holding a knife? I looked around the room, searching. Where's Josh? Where is Josh? Mom knelt beside me and burst into tears. Lori, Josh passed away 5 years ago. I stared at my parents in shock. Memories of that day flooded back. Josh lying in a pool of blood on the playground, the sirens and screams. I held him in my arms, begging him not to die, but it was too late. No, Josh is alive. I just talked to him. Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. Lori, we're taking you back to the hospital. Dr. Peter will help you. I sat there trembling. In the corner of the room, I still saw the shadow of the man in the white lab coat. So he was my doctor. But I knew very well that no matter how much medication I took, or how many doctors I saw, the terrifying feeling and the pain of losing Josh would always stay with me. Outside the window, fireworks still bloomed in the Ohio summer night sky. But for me, summer had ended a long time ago.
My name is Charity. Even now, whenever I think back to what happened when I was 7 years old, I still get chills. I was too young then to truly understand what was going on, but looking back, I know I was very close to something horrific that day. Back then, my mom was a single parent. She worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk just to make ends meet for the two of us. We had no relatives in this city, and we didn't have enough money for a babysitter. Because of that, during long school breaks, my mom was forced to leave me home alone for 6 to 8 hours every day. My mom was very strict about safety rules. I was never allowed to open the door for anyone because she had her own key. I could only answer the phone if she called at a scheduled time and said the exact phrase, "It's Mom." The curtains always had to stay closed, and I was strictly forbidden from touching the stove or anything dangerous. She also prepared meals in advance so I could grab them when I got hungry. At the time, being home alone didn't seem scary to me. It all started with a doll wedding. I needed real flowers to decorate the altar for them. Even though I knew my mom forbade me from going outside, I took a risk and opened the back door to pick some wildflowers in the yard. While I was leaning down, I jumped when I saw our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Elise, standing by the fence watering her plants. She looked at me with a cold, stern expression. I just gave her a nervous smile and bolted back inside, hoping she wouldn't tell on me. A few days later, I snuck out to the front yard to pick up some stones to build a castle. Suddenly, the dry screech of the metal gate made my heart stop. A strange woman was walking up our driveway. Instinctively, I yelled at the top of my lungs, "Mom, I'm over here!" to pretend an adult was home. Then I dashed inside and locked the door. Peeking through the curtains, I saw her knock repeatedly before she walked back to an old car parked on the street and drove away, looking frustrated. I thought that was the end of it, and I was too scared to tell my mom. The next day, the nightmare officially knocked on my door. While I was eating lunch, the knocking started again. I sat perfectly still, but a deadly curiosity forced me to peek through the blinds. To my horror, the woman was also leaning in, her eye pressed against the glass. We locked eyes from only inches away. I was terrified and thought I had been caught doing something wrong, so I took a chance and opened the door. She looked quite polite, wearing an office dress with her hair tied back. She looked a lot like my mom. She said she wanted to see my mom, and I lied, saying she was in the shower. But the woman immediately pushed the door open, stepped inside, and said she would wait. I protested, but her attitude changed instantly. She looked me straight in the eye and said she knew perfectly well I was home alone. Then she threatened to call the police because my mom had abandoned a child at home. I immediately burst into tears and started begging her. She looked at me for a moment, then softened her voice. She said that if I went with her, my mom wouldn't get into trouble and could pick me up after work. At that moment, my only thought was that I had to do something to protect my mom, so I agreed. I ran to my room, grabbed my favorite doll and a book, and came back. Then, I followed her outside. As we got close to the car, I remembered to ask if I should call my mom to let her know where we were going. At that exact moment, her tone shifted completely. She laughed and told me that my mom would never know, because I was never coming back. I immediately started screaming and tried to pull my hand away, but she gripped me tight and tried to force me into the car. In that moment of total despair, Mrs. Elise appeared. She waved and gave me a smile that, for the first time, felt incredibly warm. She walked toward us and asked what was going on. The strange woman went back to her gentle tone, saying she was taking care of me because there were no adults in the house. But Mrs. Elise stayed very calm. She looked at me, and her face wasn't cold anymore. "Hey, Katie, I told you I was just going home to grab a few things and would be right back, didn't I?" I froze, not quite understanding, but before I could say anything, Mrs. Elise turned to the woman. She explained firmly that she was my official babysitter. Mrs. Elise's presence and her confident, steady attitude made the woman hesitate. She let go of me, shoved me toward my neighbor, gave a fake smile, and muttered a few words before jumping into her car and speeding off. Once the woman was out of sight, Mrs. Elise led me into the house, locked the door, and used the landline to call my mom. I was exhausted from crying and fell fast asleep. When I woke up, I was in my mother's arms. She was crying so hard she had lost her voice, holding me tight as if she were afraid I would vanish again. It turned out that Mrs. Elise had been watching our house for a long time. She realized I was often home alone, and at first, she was cold toward us because she didn't agree with my mom leaving a small child by herself. However, when she saw a strange car lingering and then saw that woman dragging me toward it while I was screaming, her grandmotherly instincts kicked in. She had been watching the woman since the day before and had a gut feeling that something was wrong. Because she was afraid of getting into trouble with Child Protective Services, CPS, my mom didn't dare call the police. But after that incident, Mrs. Elise officially became my babysitter without asking for a single cent. She said I reminded her of her granddaughter who lived far away. More than 20 years have passed, and Mrs. Elise is old and frail now, but she is still an essential member of our family. I owe her my life. If she hadn't been brave enough to step across that yard that day, no one knows where that stranger would have taken me, or if I would even be here to tell this story today. My name is Carrie. I grew up in a small town, but I left many years ago for college. I wanted to escape the suffocating atmosphere of judgment and narrow-mindedness that defined my home. However, a relative's funeral recently forced me to go back. The funeral was typical for a small town, heavy and somber. I saw old faces, people who had been a part of my childhood, all now weathered by time. After the service, everyone gathered at the home of the deceased for a small reception with food and drinks. In a town like this, that is a tradition everyone expects. The living room was cramped, smelling of damp wood and reheated food. My relatives huddled together, clutching glasses of cheap wine. They started gossiping to update me on everything that had happened in town over the last 5 years. The conversation really began when my uncle mentioned that the famous Harris General Store had closed down. That name caught my attention immediately. It was the oldest shop in town, owned by the Harris family for generations. Almost everyone there had shopped or worked there at some point. Back in high school, I had a part-time job there, so I knew the family well. According to the group, the old owner, Robert Harris, passed away about a year ago. After the funeral, his 2 sons, Daniel and Luke, took over the business together. At first, things seemed stable, but after only a few months, bitter tension grew between the brothers. Daniel wanted to keep the store exactly as it was, following the traditional family way. Luke, on the other hand, wanted to sell the land to a large supermarket chain that was looking to open a branch in town. There was also a nasty dispute over Robert's will, as rumors spread that only one of them was named the primary heir. The disagreements turned into constant fighting. The 2 brothers argued frequently, sometimes right in the store in front of customers. Everyone in town knew about it, but no one thought it would end in a way that could never be fixed. One day, Daniel and Luke met with a lawyer to discuss the store's ownership. When they walked back to the parking lot in front of the shop, the fighting continued. Both of them lost their cool and began screaming at each other in the middle of the lot. Luke climbed into his pickup truck to leave. Daniel stood directly in front of the truck, blocking his brother from driving away while continuing to yell insults. No one knows exactly what was said, but the situation spiraled out of control. In a fit of blind rage, Luke slammed on the gas and the truck lunged forward. Daniel was struck and knocked down right in front of the truck. He died from massive injuries. Luke was arrested by the police right there at the scene. After the incident, the Harris store closed its doors forever. It all happened so fast that the whole town was left in shock. I sat there in silence as I listened. I couldn't believe a place with such a long history and a solid reputation had become the center of such a tragedy. Suddenly, an aunt sitting near me let out a soft giggle. She leaned toward me, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a juicy secret. She told me the town rumor was that after the first hit, Daniel didn't die right away. They say Luke put the truck in reverse and ran over him one more time. A few people sitting near us heard her and burst out laughing. I jerked back and sat up straight, looking around the room. I was horrified by what she said and even more stunned by everyone's reaction. At first, it was just small chuckles, but then an uncle repeated the line like he was telling a hilarious joke. Ran him over again, just to be sure. The phrase spread quickly. One person repeated it, then another. The laughter grew louder and clearer, as if they were all sharing a great comedy routine. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I sat there frozen, staring at the people around me. Just minutes ago, these same people were standing by a casket with sad faces, sharing their grief. But now, they were laughing at such a cruel, gruesome detail. The sudden shift made my blood run cold. One uncle turned to me and asked if I remembered the Harris brothers. Immediately, every eye in the room turned toward me. It felt like they were all waiting to see how I would react. I didn't answer. I just sat there, looking around. Everyone was still laughing. But then I noticed something that filled me with pure terror. Their smiles. They were all exactly the same. The corners of their mouths curled up in the same way. Their eyes were opened as wide as possible, but their gaze was empty and lifeless. I didn't run away. I just sat there, staring back at them. I happened to glance at the glass window next to me. In the faint reflection, I could see the entire room behind me, and I saw myself. The corners of my mouth were also curled up into a smile just like theirs. I didn't remember when I started laughing. I couldn't stop, and I couldn't move, even though I was fully aware of what I was doing. At that exact moment, an old memory flashed into my mind. Years ago, when I was in high school, there was another shocking incident in this town. It was an accident that killed 2 people. That night, I had been sitting in this same kitchen with these same relatives. They told the story in the exact same tone, adding gory details, and then they all laughed together. I remember that feeling very clearly, because that night I had laughed too.
My name is Doyle. When I was 10 years old, I had a very strange hobby. I loved wandering through the woods to find animal bones and bring them home to keep as treasures. My family lived in a neighborhood right on the edge of the forest. Behind our neighbor's house, there was a trail that led deep into the old-growth woods. Every kid in the area was strictly forbidden from going back there, but because of my obsession, I always found a way to sneak past the rules. I usually slipped away when my parents weren't paying attention. Once I successfully escaped into the woods, I would jump for joy and start my search. I could spend hours, or even a whole afternoon, with my head down, eyes scanning the ground, and hands constantly digging through the dirt. One afternoon, I prepared to head into the forest as usual. From the moment I stepped past the tree line behind the neighbor's house, I had an uneasy feeling I couldn't explain. But it was a perfect opportunity because my parents were going to be home late. Plus, my collection was almost complete, so I decided to push forward. The forest was incredibly quiet that day. There was no sun, so the scenery looked very gloomy. I thought about turning back, but then a small glint of light suddenly appeared between the trees. I was curious because I had never seen it before, and I subconsciously started to follow it. I went deep inside, deeper than I had ever gone before, until the light vanished. In front of me stood an old wooden cabin I had never seen. The roof was rotting, the windows were dark like empty eye sockets, and vines covered the walls. It looked exactly like a witch's house from the cartoons I used to watch. I felt a chill, but I was also excited, so I moved closer. Right next to the porch, I was drawn to a bunch of bones scattered on the ground. I assumed they were animal bones, so I knelt down to examine them. However, I quickly realized that some of the bones had unusual shapes. They were also quite large compared to the types I usually collected. I kept looking, thinking I might find a perfect piece to add to my collection. As I stepped forward, I saw a skull resting in a pile of decaying leaves. The black, hollow eye sockets were staring right at me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. But for a kid with such a weird hobby, I was pretty brave. I leaned in even closer to get a look, using my hand to brush away some leaves so I could see it clearly. When the skull was fully exposed, I saw that the jaw didn't look like any animal I owned, like a dog or a fox. And then, my heart hammered so hard it felt like it would explode out of my chest when I realized it was a human skull. I screamed and ran for my life. I crashed through thorn bushes, not daring to look back. Just as I was about to make it out of the woods, I suddenly saw a man standing right in the middle of the trail. He was very tall and thin, wearing a heavy coat even though the weather wasn't cold at all. What terrified me the most was his unblinking stare and a subtle, knowing smirk. I stopped a few yards away from him. Suddenly, he tilted his head, looked at me, and asked in a very low voice, "Did you find any bones?" That question made me freeze for a few seconds. I was stunned that he knew what I had been doing. I didn't answer. I just closed my eyes and bolted past him, heading straight for home. When I saw my parents, I immediately burst into tears and told them everything. After I described the location of the cabin, my father's expression completely changed. For the first time, I heard my parents talk about something the adults in the neighborhood had always kept secret from the children. 5 years earlier, a boy my age had gone missing after walking into those woods alone. The police searched for nearly a year but found nothing. After the incident, the boy's parents were so heartbroken that they moved away. The case had remained a mystery ever since. The police immediately cordoned off the forest for almost a week. My parents absolutely refused to tell me what they found inside that cabin. But from that day on, the trail behind the neighbor's house was fenced off, and I was permanently banned from going near those woods again. Whenever I remember it, the fear returns. I don't want to confirm the truth. But what makes me wake up gasping in the middle of the night is the memory of that man on the trail. That unblinking stare and the question about the bones. Was he the killer? And if he was, why was he still there after all those years? My name is Chris, and this is a story about something I saw with my own eyes 5 years ago. To this day, I still don't have the courage to open the photos I took that night. It was a solo camping trip over the weekend. I chose a remote forest located about a 2-hour drive from the nearest town. As I drove deeper into the woods, my cell phone signal disappeared completely. After setting up my tent by a creek, I grabbed my camera. I decided to hike deeper into the forest to catch some landscape shots at sunset. While following a strange, moss-covered trail, I suddenly spotted flickering lights in the distance. As I got closer, I discovered an old church sitting isolated in a large clearing. In front of the church, hundreds of people dressed in white were gathered in total silence around a tree. At first, I was just curious. I figured it was some kind of strange local religious ceremony, so I hid behind a large trunk to watch. But very quickly, my curiosity turned into pure horror. A thin man, with his hands and feet tightly bound, was kneeling at the base of the tree. A rope was looped around his neck and tossed over a high branch. 3 well-dressed men, who looked very different from the rest of the crowd, stepped forward. They began to pull the rope that hung over the branch. The man was instantly yanked upward, his feet dangling and kicking in midair. The surrounding crowd began to sing in unison. The man struggled violently and tried to scream for help, but the singing drowned him out. I felt like my legs were going to give out. I was all alone, and I knew I would be in grave danger if I confronted that many people. With no cell service, I couldn't call anyone for help. After only a few minutes, the man stopped moving completely. As soon as his limp body was lowered to the ground, the crowd began to cheer joyfully, as if they had just finished a sacred ritual. In total shock, I raised my camera and snapped a few photos for evidence. Then, I scrambled away in a daze. While trying to find my way back to camp, I accidentally circled around to the back of the church. I stumbled upon a field filled with wooden crosses packed tightly together. Many of the mounds of dirt were fresh and bright red, looking as if they had just been filled. At the edge of the field, I saw a child, about 10 years old, tied to a tree. I rushed over to untie the boy, but his reaction sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't scared, and he wasn't happy to see me. He looked at me with eyes that were completely hollow and soulless. When I urged him to run with me, he just shook his head. He spoke as calmly as if he were talking about a field trip. "I can't go yet. It's almost my turn. After the wedding day, we will all get to see God." I shuddered as I realized this child had been completely brainwashed. The wedding day ritual he mentioned was the horrific strangling I had just witnessed. As I tried to convince him one more time, a shout rang out behind me. 2 tall men in dark coats emerged from the shadows. They pointed directly at me and screamed. I tried to pull the boy with me to run, but he broke free and refused to follow. I had no choice. I had to run to save my own life. It was a true fight for survival. I tore through thorn bushes, feeling the sharp branches rip into my skin. The number of men in black chasing me grew. In my panic, I slipped and tumbled down a small slope, hitting a rock hard. I could barely stand up. However, the slope hid me from view, and the forest was thick and dark. I lay perfectly still as the men ran right past me without noticing. I had accidentally found the perfect hiding spot. Once I was sure they were gone, I crawled out and ran toward the main road near town before dawn. I immediately took all my photos and my story to the local police station. I thought I had uncovered a mass kidnapping and murder site, and I expected a large-scale rescue mission. But their reaction was confusing. They glanced at the photos, exchanged a knowing look with each other, and simply said they would send someone to check it out. A few days later, I was told that the leader of the group had been arrested, but was quickly released due to insufficient evidence. I tried to explain about the strangled man and the tied-up child, but the police claimed it could have been a voluntary religious ritual. They said my photos weren't clear enough to prove anything. I was stunned and felt completely helpless against their ridiculous excuses and lazy investigation. A few days later, while I was still reeling from the shock, I received an anonymous text. "Stop digging if you want to stay safe." That was when I understood. The leader's release wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. It gave him time to go back and scrub the evidence now that I had exposed the location. Perhaps those well-dressed men pulling the rope had much deeper connections than just some forest cult. For the past 5 years, I have been haunted by that child's hollow eyes. I watched a crime happen right in front of me, but in the end, I couldn't save anyone. I might have even accidentally helped the killers cover their tracks. I still have those photos on an old hard drive, but I have never dared to look at them again. The story is inspired by a real-life case. The Shakahola cult, led by Paul Mackenzie, is considered one of Kenya's most horrific tragedies. Initially, Mackenzie lured hundreds of followers with staged miracle cures, then brainwashed them into believing the apocalypse was coming and that modern society was a tool of evil. He forced followers to sell all their possessions and move to an isolated 800-acre forest. There, Mackenzie ordered followers to starve to death to meet God, with children dying first. When many no longer wanted to die, he created a wedding day ritual where guards directly strangled or beat victims to death amidst the cheers of the crowd. By 2024, authorities had unearthed more than 450 bodies, many victims showing signs of organ harvesting. Mackenzie and dozens of accomplices are currently being prosecuted for murder, terrorism, and child torture. I accidentally saved the monster on a snowy night. I have lived alone in a log cabin deep in the woods of Montana for nearly 15 years. It was the most violent blizzard I had seen in all my years in the forest. In the middle of the night, while I was reinforcing the cabin door, I heard a frantic knocking and the sound of someone moaning. When I opened the door, I was shocked to see a young man in terrible shape, nearly frozen to death. He was shaking uncontrollably in tattered clothes, and his face was as white as a sheet. He kept whispering, begging me to let him stay for just one night. Seeing him like that, I couldn't turn him away. I threw more wood into the fireplace, grabbed a blanket, and made him a hot pot of tea. After he calmed down a bit, he thanked me, though his voice was still trembling. It was clear he had been through something absolutely horrific. I checked on him and learned his name was Philip. He said he had been on a hiking trip with his girlfriend, Mia, to propose to her. Hearing this made me suspicious. This time of year was a terrible time for a long hike. Philip started telling his story through choked sobs, claiming they were attacked by wild animals. He said he had to watch Mia being torn apart right in front of his eyes,
unable to do anything to help. He sat huddled by the fire, muttering about the gruesome scene like someone on the verge of a mental breakdown. I tried to comfort Philip and asked for the exact location of the attack. I know this terrain like the back of my hand and trust my survival skills. I thought maybe there was still hope for Mia, or at least I could bring back whatever was left of her. But Philip didn't answer. He just kept crying and calling out his girlfriend's name. I figured he was too traumatized to talk, so I stopped pushing and went to cook him a bowl of soup. As I brought the soup out, the storm outside reached its peak. The wind was so strong that falling branches slammed against the cabin's tin roof with a loud roar. I quickly went around the house to make sure everything was secure, but when I walked back into the living room, the atmosphere had turned bone-chilling. Philip wasn't crying anymore. He wasn't shaking or huddling either. He was sitting straight up in the chair with an eerily calm expression, his sharp eyes staring directly at me. A remote location, extreme weather, plus the hungry animals out there, Philip repeated slowly, looking out the window. There was something in his tone that made my blood run cold. Then, Philip gave a slight smile. It's the perfect way to make sure nobody ever finds anything. I froze. The bowl of soup in my hand nearly slipped to the floor. Philip looked up at me, and his eyes were now the eyes of a predator enjoying his prize. Philip began to speak in a flat, calm voice about how he had lured Mia into an area with animal tracks. He described watching her panic and run into the blizzard, and how the forest quickly swallowed her screams. He wasn't a victim. He was a killer who was proud of his crime. He burst into a delighted laugh that echoed throughout the cabin. In that moment, I realized I had invited a demon into my home. I stayed as calm as I could, trying not to draw his attention as I backed up toward the wall near the dining table. My hunting shotgun was hanging right there, but Philip was faster than I expected. The moment my hand touched the gun, he pulled a folding knife from his jacket and lunged at me like a rabid animal. Everything happened in a flash. We wrestled in the middle of the cramped cabin. I realized he was much stronger than he looked, and every strike he threw was aimed to kill. The sharp blade kept grazing my face.
I managed to point the barrel at him, but in a split second of hesitation because I didn't want to become a killer myself, Philip lunged and knocked the gun aside. Immediately after, he buried the blade deep into my shoulder. Philip laughed with excitement when he heard me scream in pain. His overconfidence gave me one last chance. I pushed through the pain, used every bit of my strength to kick him hard in the stomach, and scrambled for the gun. Philip lunged again, but this time, I was faster. As soon as I grabbed the shotgun, I aimed at his legs and pulled the trigger repeatedly. But instead of screaming in agony, he just looked down at his wounds and started laughing like a complete madman. I quickly tied him up and secured him to the window bars. Since there was no cell service to call the police, I had to guard this wild animal all through the night and until the next afternoon. The ordeal ended when I handed Philip over to the police and gave them all the information about the girl named Mia. According to what I learned later, the police found traces of the crime. Mia was real, but all that remained of the poor girl were 2 fingers and a single shoe buried in the snow. She had been consumed by wild animals, exactly as his cruel plan intended. Ever since that night with Philip, if a man knocks on my door, I refuse to open it. I thought I had lived in the woods long enough to know what was dangerous, until I opened the door and let Philip inside.
My name is Hal, and I am 30 years old. My girlfriend Emily and I are both freelancers. Our lives are never rooted in one place. We live full-time in our van with our 2 dogs, working and traveling across the United States. But sometimes, that freedom comes with risks I never truly expected. I will never forget the fateful day of January 24th, 2023. That day, we were camping in a very remote area in Texas. From early morning, the sky looked gloomy with heavy gray clouds. We turned on our NOAA weather radio to keep track of the situation. At first, we thought it would just be a normal thunderstorm, maybe a bit loud, but it would pass. But the air inside the van suddenly felt suffocating when the radio announced, "Tornado confirmed in the orange sector." Emily looked at me, startled. She rushed to check the weather radar on her phone and gasped, "How? We are right in the middle of that orange zone." I looked at her, worried and speechless. An orange zone meant high danger. A tornado was very likely to hit. We started discussing a plan to move, but everything happened too fast. The wind began to howl, and rain poured down like a waterfall, slamming against the sides of the van. Emily completely panicked. She kept asking me, "Where do we go? What do we do? I can't stay calm, Hal." Because Emily was so upset, I had to force myself to stay level-headed, even though I was just as terrified inside. Our two dogs huddled in the corner of the van. They could sense the tension and the danger in the air. I quickly assessed the situation. The only road out of the area was already blocked by fallen trees and flying debris. Initially, we decided to hunker down inside the van, hoping it would be strong enough to protect us. I pulled Emily close, trying to reassure her that everything would be okay. But that tiny bit of hope was cruelly crushed. The radio blared an emergency alert. "A large and extremely dangerous tornado has been located in the area. Complete destruction is possible. Take cover immediately." The phrase, "complete destruction," echoed in my head like a death sentence. Suddenly, the van didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a thin tin can waiting to be crushed. Emily began to sob, clutching me and the two dogs as if it were the last time. Then, the peak of the horror arrived. A strange sound came from the distance. At first, it was a low rumble on the horizon, but within seconds, it amplified into an earth-shattering roar. "What is that? Is that a train?" Emily screamed through her tears. The roar sounded like dozens of freight trains charging toward us at a terrifying speed. I realized that was the freight train sound people always use to describe a tornado. It was headed straight for us. The van began to shake violently against the force of the wind. Everything inside flipped over, shattering across the floor. I could feel the van being lifted, tilting to one side. In a split second, I realized staying in the car was suicide. The van would be tossed like a dry leaf, and we would die inside it. "Move! Get out now! To the back!" I yelled. Pure instinct took over. I threw open the back doors of the van. The wind immediately rushed in, blowing our belongings out into the storm. We grabbed the dogs and leaped out of the van into a storm that was tearing the sky apart. About 10 yards away, there was a shallow drainage ditch filled with swirling mud and murky water. We dove into it. I pushed Emily and the dogs flat against the bottom of the ditch and used my own body to shield them. In that moment, I heard the sound of metal being torn apart right above my head. The screaming wind wasn't just wind anymore. It was the roar of a monster swallowing everything in its path. Dirt, rocks, branches, and pieces of our van flew over us. I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling the freezing, muddy water soak into my skin, silently praying for a miracle. "You're going to be okay, I promise. We're going to make it," I whispered in her ear. It felt like it lasted forever, but in reality, it was probably only 5 to 7 minutes. The eye of the tornado passed, the train sound faded away, and all that was left was heavy rain and the haunting silence of a battlefield. When we slowly lifted our heads from the mud, the landscape was completely unrecognizable. Our van was flipped on its side, twisted like a piece of crumpled paper. Nearby storage buildings had been leveled into piles of brick and scrap. But somehow, we were still there. Emily, the dogs, and I, all of us were soaked, shivering, and covered in mud, but no one was seriously hurt. We held each other tight in the middle of the wreckage, crying tears of joy because we were alive. The decision to leave the van at the last second saved our lives. If we had stayed inside for one more minute, the outcome would have been unthinkable. In that life or death moment, love and survival instinct led us to make the right choice.
This story happened in the summer of 2011 when I was only 14 years old. To give you a better picture, my family owned a remote piece of land in western Maryland. It was private property deep in the mountains where almost everyone living nearby was related to my family in one way or another. I grew up there running around with my cousins, and I always believed it was the safest place in the world. But a fateful day by the Savage River shattered that innocent belief forever. It was a sweltering summer afternoon. My cousin, who was 1 year older than me, and I decided to go for a walk along the rugged dirt path that follows the rushing Savage River. My cousin was a little junior entomologist, so he spent the whole time with his eyes glued to the ground, looking for bugs or crawfish. I just strolled along beside him, enjoying the sound of the water hitting the rocks. Everything seemed normal until I heard a very distinct sound. A sharp click echoed through the quiet air. It wasn't a branch snapping, and it wasn't the sound of stones hitting each other. I whipped my head toward the opposite bank of the river. Not even 15 feet away, a stranger had just stepped out from the thick brush. He was wearing a black jacket and holding a camera that was still pointed directly at me. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I saw his large frame and felt a terrifying certainty that he was staring right at me. Then, he smiled. I knew he was smiling because I could see his teeth clearly. His shoulders shook slightly, and a low, muffled laugh drifted across the water. Before I could even react, I heard another click. He took a second photo. I flinched and stepped back, but I froze. Then, he lowered his camera, kept that same smile on his face, and slowly wagged his index finger back and forth. The gesture was unmistakable, exactly like the way an adult wags their finger when scolding a child for doing something wrong. I didn't know what that signal meant, but my heart started racing. Next, he pointed down at his side. I followed his hand and saw a knife sheath attached to his belt. Then, he brought his hand up to his throat and slowly, deliberately drew his finger across it in a slit throat motion. In that moment, my mind went completely blank. I couldn't think of anything specific. I only had one reflex. I lunged over, grabbed my cousin's arm, and screamed, "Run! Run now!" As soon as we turned to bolt, I heard a third click behind us, followed immediately by the sound of water splashing. Splash! Splash! He was wading through the river, coming after us. I sprinted for my life through the dense bushes, my heart pounding like it wanted to jump out of my chest. The path back home was full of rocks and slippery roots. In my total panic, I tripped over a dry branch and fell face first into the dirt. I hit the ground so hard that I could taste the thick, metallic flavor of blood in my mouth. I had bitten through my lip. My knees and hands were stinging, but my fear was 1,000 times stronger than the pain. I wasn't on the ground for even 3 seconds before I scrambled back up, pulling my cousin along as we kept flying. I swear I could hear branches snapping right behind me. When the campsite finally appeared ahead, my legs were nearly numb. My breath was ragged, my throat was bone dry, and my lip was swelling up from the cut. I ran straight into the middle of the adults and told them everything. I described his throat-slit gesture in detail, using both my words and my hands. My grandfather didn't ask many questions. He and a few other men in the family grabbed their rifles and headed toward the river path. The atmosphere turned incredibly tense. They searched for 2 hours. When they came back, they shook their heads and said no one was there. They found no suspicious signs at all. When my mother heard this, she sighed. She looked at me with a stern expression and said I was probably just panicking and letting my imagination run wild. "Look at how you've hurt yourself just being so worked up," she said. Of course, I argued back immediately. I tried to explain that I fell because I was running for my life, but she wouldn't change her mind. I turned to my cousin, hoping he would confirm what we saw. but he just looked at everyone and then at me with a confused expression. He scratched his head and said he only ran because he saw me running, but he didn't notice anything else. He hadn't looked at the riverbank, and he didn't hear the camera because he was too busy looking for bugs. That was the moment I learned what it felt like to be completely alone. I stood there under the skeptical eyes of my family, feeling a horrible sense of helplessness. The thing I wanted to do most right then was kick my cousin. 15 years have passed, but I still remember every detail of that man's appearance and his gestures. I always think about those photos he took. I wonder where they are now. Am I sitting in some collection somewhere, captured in a moment of pure terror? I still go back to that campsite with my family every year, but I don't feel comfortable there anymore. I'm always on guard. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. The only thing I'm certain of is that it happened. It was real. I still have a small scar on my lip as a reminder that this memory wasn't just a figment of my imagination.
I'm Nicole, 26, and I love life on the road. I converted an old Ford Transit van into a fully equipped mobile home. I came to the mountains of Montana in early winter. That night was December 17th, and the temperature dropped lower than expected. Even in the wilderness, I'd never felt lonely or scared until that night. I fell into a deep sleep, curled up in my thick sleeping bag, feeling safe in my little van. I jolted awake. My phone showed 4:27 a.m. Maybe it was just a tree branch blown against the van by the wind. The sound came again, and it wasn't a branch. My mind told me it might just be a hiker needing help, but no one hikes at 4 a.m. in such heavy snow. I reached for my phone, trembling as I turned on the video recording app. "I know you're in there. I've been watching you." A deep male voice echoed. My throat tightened. I tried to keep my phone steady. "I don't know you. What do you want?" I crawled towards the driver's seat, careful not to make a sound. Through the windshield, I saw a car parked far away, its headlights blazing. "I like the color of the underwear you're wearing." He sounded amused. My heart stopped. How long had he been watching me? "I've called the police. They're on their way." A raspy laugh replied. "There's no cell service here, Lisa. You checked when you arrived, remember? You even complained about it. A pretty car like this must have a lot of doors. I wonder if you've locked them all." I swallowed hard. The passenger window. It wasn't secure, and I hadn't had time to fix it. My survival instinct kicked in. I lunged for the driver's seat. The keys were already in the ignition. The engine roared to life in the dark. The van lurched forward, almost sliding off the unpaved road. In the rearview mirror, I saw the black car also start to move, its headlights aimed directly at my van. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, speed rocketing to 55 miles per hour on the slippery forest road. The snow fell heavier, visibility reduced to just a few feet in front of me. The other car closed in, less than 15 feet from my tail. I could see the outlines of two men behind the wheel. The road suddenly curved. Instead of slowing down, I tightened my grip on the wheel and took a risk. I knew a small path that continued along the hillside. As I reached the bend, I suddenly pulled the handbrake, sharply turned the wheel, and swerved the van onto the narrow path to the right. The van tilted but held on. The car behind couldn't react in time to the maneuver. It sped straight down the main road, tires screeching in the dark as they realized they'd lost me. I turned off my lights, letting the van slowly coast down the path. After a few minutes, I stopped beside a large rock, hiding the van from the main road. The receding engine sound indicated they had gone in the other direction. All night, I sat leaning against the door, my heart rate unable to return to normal. As soon as dawn broke, I drove to the nearest town's police station. I reported everything. The officer listened, his expression growing more concerned. "I need to tell you something." The officer sighed. "This isn't the first report we've received. In the past 6 months, 3 other women have reported similar experiences when alone at night. What happened to them? 2 of them disappeared 2 weeks later. The third was found, but I don't want to go into detail. So, there's a predator targeting women? Not one. I think they operate as a group. I returned to my van. The sense of safety it once provided was completely gone. I decided to drive home to my parents in Ohio and sell the van. On the way, I stopped in a small town to stay overnight at a hotel. As I walked into the hotel room and locked the door, the images of that terrifying experience kept replaying in my mind. I opened my phone to rewatch the video I had recorded. Maybe I would see something I had missed. With trembling hands, I opened the video file. The screen was pitch black, but the audio was clearly recorded. Lisa. I replayed that part. The man had called me Lisa, but my name is Nicole. I quickly opened my Instagram app, searching for the name Lisa, along with the keywords van life and Montana. After a few minutes of scrolling, my heart nearly stopped. A young woman named Lisa Wilson, with reddish-brown hair like mine, also lived in a van and had come to Montana 2 months ago. As I looked deeper into her pictures, I noticed many astonishing similarities. Not just the hair color, but also her hairstyle, clothing style, and even how she decorated her van. I scrolled down to Lisa's older posts. She bought her van from the same dealership in Seattle where I bought mine. The Ford Transit model is very popular in the van life community, and metallic silver paint is also a common choice. I scrolled further and discovered that Lisa had worked for the same travel magazine I had contributed to. I believed that if anyone followed both of us on social media, they could easily mistake us for each other. I rushed to my camera bag and pulled out an old memory card I hadn't deleted. There was a photo of a sunrise near the campground, and in the distance, I saw a Ford Transit van identical to mine. My hands trembled as I realized the truth. They mistook me for Lisa. Immediately, I called the police officer who took my report. The police asked me to bring the van to the station for a thorough inspection. My Ford Transit wasn't Lisa's van, but they were almost identical. More importantly, through GPS and gas station data, the police discovered that both Lisa and I had traveled similar routes within the past 2 months. 2 weeks later, I heard that the FBI had arrested 4 suspects at a secluded farm more than 60 miles from me. They found evidence linking them to at least 7 other disappearances in Montana and other states. This network had been operating for years, targeting people living on the road because they had less social contact. Lisa Wilson was not found alive. 6 months later, I'm still trying to rebuild my life in a small apartment in Columbus. I no longer live on the road, but I've never given up on my dream of freedom and exploration. Instead, I'm writing a book about women's safety. In my photography notebook, I still keep a picture of Lisa, the stranger whose life became intertwined with mine by chance. It was a cold, rainy night. It was around 2 a.m., and the temperature outside was about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. We had just left a fun party and were driving home. We were on a desolate, dark road that runs alongside the Rogue River in Belmont, Michigan. Suddenly, my friend who was driving gasped and stared straight ahead. My friend in the back seat and I quickly looked too, and we saw it. A figure was crawling on the pavement ahead, inching forward. "Is that a person or an animal?" I asked, my voice shaking. We drove closer. My friend at the wheel didn't slow down, but quickly swerved to avoid the thing. Our headlights illuminated it in a flash, and we zipped past. It looked like a woman, her hair matted and covering her face. Her clothes were soaked, and she was crawling in a bizarre way. She looked like a giant spider scuttling across the asphalt. No one spoke for a few seconds. All we heard was the car's engine and our own heavy breathing. After a quick argument, we turned the car around. Our main feeling wasn't curiosity. It was that our conscience wouldn't let us abandon someone in that kind of situation. When we came back, we saw her more clearly. It was a young woman, maybe in her 20s. She was hunched in the middle of the road in an unnatural crouch. Her knees were pressed together, her feet splayed out, and her body was bent forward. Her head was slowly swaying back and forth. We stopped the car a few yards from her. I stared, trying to analyze what was happening. Suddenly, she raised one hand and moved it up and down rhythmically. Then she abruptly stopped. A few seconds later, she started beating her head repeatedly with her hand. We could clearly hear the thud even inside the car. We were all startled by the woman's action. What truly sent a chill down our spines was her expression. In the headlights, we could see her eyes were abnormally wide open, but they weren't focused on anything specific. Her mouth was agape, but no sound came out. Her hair was drenched and stuck to her cheeks and neck. In that cold, there was no way a conscious person would be in that state. We decided to back up a little to observe from a safer distance. Then she started to laugh. It sounded like a terrifying mixture of a cough and a moan, echoing in the empty space. My friend in the back screamed, "Drive! Drive now!" But the driver didn't react. I couldn't take my eyes off the woman either. She stopped laughing and started crawling toward us. She maintained that bizarre posture, arms and legs straight, head low to the ground, yet her face remained fixed on us. The distance between us shrank. I could hear her raspy breathing. My friend quickly slammed the car into reverse. The tires squealed and we backed up about 30 feet, but the woman didn't stop. She kept crawling toward us, one movement after another, maintaining her pace. Then she suddenly froze, completely motionless like a statue. We stopped the car, watching for a moment longer. We all held our breath, not daring to move. Then, as if someone had flipped a power switch, the woman collapsed straight down onto the road. Her body hit the pavement with a heavy thud. Immediately following was the loud impact of her head hitting the road. I winced, imagining how much that must have hurt. I quickly grabbed my phone and called 911, trying to describe what we had just witnessed. But I struggled with the words. She was crawling weirdly. She was hitting her own head, then laughing, and now she's lying still. The dispatcher tried to calm me down, telling us to stay in the car and wait. While waiting, I couldn't take my eyes off the figure lying on the road. About 10 minutes later, the police and an ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed over to check the girl's vital signs. I saw them talking urgently to each other, and they quickly placed her on a stretcher. As they lifted her, I caught one last glimpse of her face. Her eyes were still wide but unfocused. A police officer came over to get information from us. My brain was trying to process everything we had just seen. We were allowed to leave after about 20 minutes of talking with the police. A few hours later, after it was light out, I drove back to the scene alone. What I noticed was some freshly disturbed dirt along the riverbank near the road. This suggested that she had most likely fallen into the Rogue River and struggled to swim onto the road just minutes before our car passed. Over the next few days, the story slowly came together. The woman was named Angela, 28, a student attending Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, over 200 miles away. She had been reported missing 2 days before we encountered her. Angela's friend said that before she disappeared, she constantly talked about feeling like someone was following her. She was always in a state of high stress and on edge. When she finally woke up in the hospital, doctors explained that Angela had experienced a state of dissociative fugue. This is the brain's defense mechanism when a person faces levels of stress and fear that exceed their coping ability. The brain, unable to process the continuous horror, chooses to disconnect from reality. In this state, patients completely forget their identity. They don't know where they are or what they're doing. They can perform complex actions, like driving a car, but have no conscious awareness of those actions. Some studies suggest that patients in this state may experience hallucinations, hearing voices, or seeing images that don't exist, and acting on invisible commands. The brain creates an alternative reality to avoid confronting the true fear. Angela had been living in that alternative reality for 2 days. She drove aimlessly, without eating or sleeping. Then somehow, she ended up in the Rogue River. The shock of the freezing water must have roused a part of her consciousness enough for her to crawl onto the road, but not enough to fully regain awareness. I still clearly remember Angela's vacant eyes and her strange actions. What exactly had she gone through for her brain to simply stop processing? Angela physically recovered, but she remembers nothing about those 2 days. She went to sleep on a Friday night and woke up in the hospital on a Monday, completely bewildered. I still occasionally drive past that stretch of road at night. I wonder if there is anyone else wandering out there, someone trapped in a fuzzy world, no longer themselves. Have any of you ever experienced or known someone with dissociative fugue? If so, please share your story below. Perhaps your story will help others recognize the warning signs before it's too late.
Mm-hmm.